This is Greg Olson, inviting you to check out my new Blue Wire podcast, TE1, where I interview tight ends throughout the history of the NFL who have helped revolutionize the position. TE1 is presented by the Chevy Silverado. The Silverado is all about grit. It's strong and dependable, exactly like playing tight end. Just like the incredible players we sit down with on the podcast, the Chevy Silverado is in a league of its own. Strong, advanced, and dependable. Download TE1 today, wherever you listen to podcasts.
What is cracking, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my co-host Adam Frommel today. Still have a loaded podcast for you, though. I'm going to do a solo mailbag since we solicited your questions and Adam can't be here for it. I'm going to get into both the Celtics and the Nuggets being down 3-1, using some questions as an impetus to talk about what they'll need to do ahead of their Game 5s, and then there will be obviously other mailbag questions. And then we get into our Milwaukee Bucks look ahead, just a fascinating team this offseason. I've brought in Ty Windisch of the Gyro Step podcast, also of the Blue Wire Network. You can follow him on Twitter at Ty Windisch. That's at TIWINDISCH. It was a great conversation. It runs long, but I've been throwing timestamps up there for everybody, so I hope you've been enjoying these. Hope you enjoy these team look aheads. To that point, please subscribe and download all of our episodes if you're listening to us. That's the biggest way to help us. The second biggest way to help us, and that has kind of stalled a little bit, we would implore you to head over to iTunes, whether you use it or not, search Hardwood Knocks, and throw us a 5-star rating, write a review. That helps us out a ton as well. And then, of course, word of mouth. Recommend us to your friends, family, frenemies, anybody you know. Steal people's phones if you're properly socially distancing and can steal people's phones, and subscribe them to Hardwood Knocks on their behalf. You can do it, and they will thank you later. Last but certainly not least, though, shout out to our sponsors this week who make this podcast possible, BetOnline and Indeed. You'll be hearing from them throughout this podcast. And really, before we get started, just remember to follow us too, this podcast, at Hardwood Knocks on Twitter. Head over to youtube.com, search Hardwood Knocks, subscribe there, like our videos. That helps a bunch too. But look, hey, let's get into this mailbag. I feel kind of weird doing a podcast alone. It's been a minute and a half since that really happened. We'll get started with the why don't we get going with the Celtics here, since their series could end against the Miami Heat as you're listening to this. This question comes from Jeff Nicholas, who actually has two questions in this episode because they were so good, and I actually commandeered one from him. But he says, I keep hearing media folks referring to Miami zone as simple, a high school D, or even a junk D. Could you guys talk about the things Miami is doing that differentiate their zone from the ones people learned about at the boys club? So I have not seen anyone call it a junk D, particularly when it's been so effective. And look, I'm not this X's and O's savant. I wish that I could watch and see and think the game the way that so many others can. That's not my brand. But that being said, Boston has struggled against the zone all year statistically, and so it's kind of no surprise that they've also grappled with what Miami's doing. I think some of the things that I've noticed and read about that seems to differentiate Miami is if they're going to go in a 2-3 zone, they don't really seem scared about putting their two best wing defenders like just up front, and then you could plant your two weaker defenders but behind them, and you're going to try and just coax action then to, let's assume Bam Adebayo is on the court, and they'll direct offenses to him that way. And that's worked for them, it seems, in the times that they have gone to it. And it also, I mean, when you have Jay Crowder and Jimmy Butler up at the top there, it feels like you can force Boston into a ton of more turnovers and then just really get some nice contests in there where you're not going to give up as many, I don't want to say wide open threes, but easier threes. And that has been the case if you look at what's been going on in this series. They're forcing turnovers on 16.5% of Boston's possessions right now. That is up from Boston during the regular season, where they were right around, I think 13.1% was where they landed, 13.6%, So that number's up. Then if you look at just the types of threes that they're taking in this series, 10% flat of Boston's attempts have gone straight contested from beyond the arc, not heavily contested. it's with a defender between 2 and 4 feet away. That is basically double just the percentage that they had going during the regular season. And so the other thing that you notice when you watch Miami is that they just they work. Depending on who's on the floor, but their rotations can be on point, and so they're going to force the Celtics to work in late into the shot clock, and that might account for some of these lower percentage looks that they're then getting. And not every defense is going to be built to do that, and so the ball movement for Boston at points too is kind of been good on some of these possessions, but you just turn around and Jay Crowder's right there or Jimmy Butler's right there, and it ends up being a huge deal. So I think more so than anything, the Heat's personnel has kind of allowed them to maximize the times that they've gone to zone D. And then they also don't necessarily need to use it as a crutch if Boston busts it up the way that it kind of did at points in game 3. And I think that's really helped them. And this question kind of dovetails nicely with what Boston kind of has to do to win this series. And that's they got to solve the zone defense somehow. And maybe that's not the way to go or that's not something that we can expect from them just because they've struggled against it all season. You would hope that having Gordon Hayward back would maybe help. At the same time, they're still not teaming with guys who are going to put a ton of pressure on the rim. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are probably your two best options. It just doesn't look like Kemba Walker has the juice to do that right now. Marcus Smart, not necessarily someone you can rely on to do that so frequently, and that's kind of always been not a huge knock against the Celtics, but it was definitely something people focused on with Jason Tatum's game. He's gotten better at it, but when you're just looking at what Miami is putting out there, if you're going to have Jimmy Butler and Jay Crowder just as that first line of defense against guys who are going to try and attack the basket, that's going to get difficult. And failing that, then you're just going to have to hit just your jump shots at these higher clips. And so we can look at this series in some, but if you look at game 4 specifically, which is a game that Boston, by the way, could have won, they're going 14 of 40 from 3. And that's fine, but you're probably going to need to hit more than that going up against this. If you're going to take 43 pointers would be my point. So you're only a plus 12 from beyond the arc against Miami in that game, which was 10 of 37 themselves. And look, Boston's defense was good in that game. If you're looking for sort of adjustments, I thought they did all right. And Tyler Herro just hit a bunch of difficult shots. So Goran Dragic did not have his best game of the series. Jimmy Butler was just so as well when you're looking at their efficiency. So that Boston seems to, I don't want to say figured out Miami there, but they're definitely okay. It's that they're going to have to get just more consistent offensively. And I don't know if they have what it takes. If Miami's going to continue to lean on this zone, which it seems like they will, I don't know if they necessarily have the personnel right now to break it. Let's move on to the Nuggets-Lakers series, though. This one's going to come from Jordan Scott. He asked thoughts on this, which is a tweet that says Monte Morris is slashing 65, 60, 84 in this series. LMAO, WTF. That is the appropriate reaction. And after game 4, Monte Morris is now slashing about 63, 43, 77. We'll get deeper into this series. I'm just using this question as a launching point. It's the only Nuggets-Lakers question we had. Monte Morris is in the conversation, probably subtly because I don't feel like he's not talked about nationally, but as the best backup point guard in the NBA. And it probably helps a little bit that you can't really consider Marcus Smart or Fred VanVleet that guy anymore. They were predominantly starters this year. The other names in the conversation, maybe Dennis Schroeder, Spencer Dinwiddie could be right up there as well. But you just look at what Monte Morris is able to do. He does have usually great command of the game. A lot is made of how he just doesn't turn the ball over, and that's absolutely huge. He's someone who's going to be an efficient three-point shooter, doesn't necessarily need the ball in his hands, but he also has this disarming sort of attack to him where he's not super explosive, but he's going to take these little push shots, floaters in the lane, and he'll get by guys. He's not afraid to go up against contact, and he just does all these things so smartly, and that amounts to just a super effective, interesting player. You could get away with minutes of him and Jamal Murray playing together, especially because of how Jamal Murray has been competing on defense. I really like him. Don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but he's going to be a free agent after next season, and his next contract is going to be just fascinating. I don't know what he would end up landing, but it's certainly going to be more than the pennies on the dollar he's making in Denver. He's at $1.7 million non-guaranteed for next year. They are absolutely going to guarantee that, though. But so game 4 for the Nuggets was, I don't know if you would call it a disaster because they only lose by 6 and definitely a winnable game for them. And we've said that a bunch this series. The things that I think stand out most, and you could say having Paul Millsap and Nikola Jokic in foul trouble at points definitely didn't help. And then even when Jokic was on the floor for a bunch of this game, it didn't feel like he was being too aggressive. That's like something. The bigger things to me, and it's even more so than saying you can't against this Lakers team, like you have to win the 3-point battle. That's just how I come in looking at this. So yes, they were 10 of 28, 35.7%. That's Denver, but LA was 10 of 30. And so when you know that LA is going to generate extra possessions on the offensive glass, and just because they're going to get out in transition a bunch, you have to win the 3-point battle because the Denver just very clearly has better shooting personnel on their team, I would say. But you also have to look, I think, at this one at the second chance points. The Lakers outscored Denver 25-6 in second chance points in a 6-point game. And then just on top of that, like the Lakers were +8 at the foul line. That's absolutely a killer. I mean, like you're giving up basically 27 points right there while tying them in the 3-point category. That's not going to be a great recipe to win. I don't necessarily know how they can control the glass a little bit better. It felt like, especially late in the game, like they weren't expecting shots earlier in the shot clock from the Lakers, and then guys just weren't in position. But there's no reason Rondo should be grabbing an offensive rebound. So the Nuggets have to do a better job of keeping the Lakers off the glass, specifically Dwight Howard just in small bursts. Look, Anthony Davis had 1 offensive rebound in this game and only 5 rebounds overall. So it's not even him that was necessarily killing them. Like they're just getting out muscled and out hustled by Dwight Howard. And then the offensive rebounds just are coming like in miniature from everywhere, where LeBron has 1. I mentioned Anthony Davis has 1. KCP has 1. Danny Green has 1. Rondo has 2. Like that shouldn't be an actual thing. And so you're definitely going to have to tone that down leading into game 5 if you want there to be a game 6. And look, the Nuggets have been here before. The jokes are going to be made. I made one on Twitter that said the Nuggets are now up 1-3 on the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. We've seen that this is a mentally tough Denver team, and that a bad performance that puts them on the ropes does not disqualify them from really just coming out and punching back. I would expect game 5 hopefully to be a close one. That wasn't necessarily convincing, but just based off what we've seen, yeah, there's the chance that the Nuggets are just exhausting. But in a game where they like far from executed perfectly, from where there were all these foul calls on Jokic and Millsap when they were guarding LeBron specifically, like they were still in it. And look, if LeBron James doesn't make the switch to Jamal Murray defensively later in the game and put the screws to him, are we talking about a Denver victory? Or am I still watching this game because it went into overtime? It did seem like LeBron got away with some, we'll call it light hacking, that should have been called. But the fact that he was able to hang on that assignment late in the game, like Jamal Murray was just absolutely on a tear in this one. 32 points, 8 assists, just been really just turned perception for me of him completely in these playoffs, where I still viewed him as this up and down player who maybe didn't necessarily peak, but I wasn't sure if he was bankable. I think he's bankable now. And if he's just going to be more valuable to you in the playoffs, as we've talked about on this podcast in the regular season, I mean, that's absolutely fine. And maybe another thing you could point to from Denver is like you're going to just have to get better wing minutes here. Jeremy Grant had to go 43 deep in this one, in part, again, because Millsap and even Jokic a little bit, like those two, having them in foul trouble hurts. But Gary Harris is giving you nothing on offense, and so he's playing sub 20 minutes in this one. Torrey Craig, you just can't trust his shooting 1 of 4 from beyond the arc. Can you get away with playing him for more than 20 minutes? And then it seemed like head coach Mike Malone was really throwing shade at Michael Porter Jr. for his defense in this one. He was relatively efficient in the minutes he played, 5 of 8 from the floor, 3 of 6 from 3, including this like awesome step back it was earlier in the game. I don't know where they're going to look to aside from Grant to get more consistent wing minutes. And look, Grant wasn't even like great offensively, but he is at least like the energy is there and he's attacking, and he's probably, you're not going to count on him to shoot too well from 3 all the time, but he's been 39+% for the past 2 seasons, coming off a huge game there. But you need a Harris game to pop, or you need Michael Porter Jr. just be better with his rotations. And if you can get one of those things, it's that more likely. Or just get a Torrey Craig hits threes game. Like I don't really know. That's where I'm at. Maybe you go to PJ Dozier more. That's probably another option. It's weird that we're talking about them potentially doing that. And you have to look. You have to hope that both your two of your three primary bigs in Jokic and Millsap aren't in this much foul trouble, because this doesn't feel like a Mason Plumlee series right now. I'm just not going to lie. -7 in 13, almost 14 minutes for him. But of these two series, though, if I had to guess where we're most likely to see a game 5, this is going to crush my soul. I think it's Boston, Miami, who feel more evenly matched. And that goes against everything we've seen from the Nuggets. I picked the Nuggets in 7 in this series. That was mostly out of sheer stubbornness, though. Something about, I don't know that the Lakers have necessarily figured out the Nuggets, but Anthony Davis has just been absolutely world-beating in this series. Like, the shots he's hitting, I talk a lot about how he's so good offensively because so much of his scoring comes within the flow of everything. He is the flow for points in this, like hitting these ridiculously difficult jumpers. We saw his game winner in game 2, it was. And then, like, you look at his fourth quarter efficiency in this series. This comes from the Fast Break Breakfast podcast. 92.5 true shooting in the fourth quarter of this series. I mean, like, that's just melting my mind right now, even thinking about it. And you don't necessarily have an answer for him. And the Nuggets as a team have been absolutely carved up, as we mentioned on the last podcast, whenever Jokic is his primary defender. And it doesn't even matter if Davis is finishing the play. The Lakers have just absolutely brutalized them in those situations. So a lot of things that are not tilting Denver's favor. I would say that the factors that they can control is you can be way more aggressive on the defensive glass, and I can't even say that they can control the wing minutes. I think it's, can you shoot better from beyond the arc, like better than the Lakers? Those seem like more controllable things here. And I can't even say stay out of foul trouble is a controllable thing, just because if LeBron gets going downhill, and even with Anthony Davis, like those are incredibly tough covers. So they're going to need, some of the stuff feels like it's beyond their control, but definitely the second chance points have to be limited for them to have a legitimate shot at making this third 3-1 comeback. And if they do that, I don't even know. I think Twitter would just implode.
Even though sports had a break, your business didn't. You have to keep moving, and that makes hiring more important than ever. Indeed is here to help. Indeed.com is the #1 job site in the world because it gives you the best people fast. Unlike other sites, Indeed gives you full control and payment flexibility over your hiring. You only pay for what you need, you can pause your account at any time, and there are no long-term contracts. Plus, Indeed provides powerful tools to make your search that much easier, like sponsored jobs, which are shown to be 3.5 times more likely to result in the hire. With 73% of online job seekers visiting Indeed each month, Indeed is going to get you the important hire you need, just like they have for over 3 million businesses. Right now, Indeed is offering our listeners a free $75 credit to boost your job post, which means more quality candidates will see it fast. Try Indeed out with a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. This is their best offer available anywhere. Go right now to Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Offer is valid through September 30th, which is my birthday, so you know it's good.
Anyway, moving on to just around the league, I guess, although I think we will touch on the Nuggets again once more. This is the second question from Jeff Nicholas. He asks, is it just me, or is hiring a coach for the free agent he might be able to attract in several years a bad idea, before even getting to Harden and D'Antoni never making the finals and having multiple ugly flameouts? So this is because of the report that said the Sixers are at least partially intrigued by Mike D'Antoni as their coach, because they believe that he could lure James Harden there in a couple of years. That is something. I don't really know how else to say it. It definitely can't be the primary reason that you hire a Mike D'Antoni, because James Harden is not scheduled for free agency, I believe, until 2023. And at that point, we're talking about in James Harden, who is going to be 34 at that point, having just wrapped up his age 33 season. I'm actually going to double check his contract to make sure there wasn't a player option on it, but I don't know why you're banking that far into the future. I guess there's the aspect of the trade, because the Rockets do feel very combustible. So you're going to hire a coach based on the fact that he might help you trade for a player. Like, you don't need Mike D'Antoni to trade for James Harden insofar as he ever gets on the chopping block. And so I misspoke. He does have the player option in 2022. So there's 2 years at that point, and then he will be 33 coming off his age 32 season. You can't make the decision to hire Mike D'Antoni solely because of Harden. It just doesn't make any sense. I will say it does feel like, Jeff pointed to Houston not having the best playoff success. It does really feel like Harden and Mike D'Antoni had a good relationship, though. Like, this didn't seem like a byproduct of a failure between them, D'Antoni leaving Houston. That felt more organizational. I don't know if maybe he didn't support the Westbrook trade, or he was just really turned off by the way Tillman Fertitta handled those contract extensions over the offseason. So no, that is not a valid reason to hire a coach. And look, I'm fairly intrigued by Mike D'Antoni in Philly, not just because he was, there for a minute previously. A lot of people are just going to say, well, that's just not the type of team that he's going to coach. And I do think that Mike D'Antoni deserves a little bit more credit for being adaptable. Like, this isn't Tom Thibodeau here, where the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that he's stubborn and rigid and just inflexible. Look at what he's done in Houston. Did you ever envision him as, yes, could you have said getting away from a team with a traditional center? Sure. A team that's going to take like a zillion 3-pointers every game? Absolutely. But a team that's super ISO heavy, like that was never D'Antoni's shtick. And so there are things that he runs too when you're looking at Houston's off-ball screening and some other stuff that was pointed out by Caitlin Cooper of Indy Cornrows, since he's in the running for the Pacers job as well. Like, he can kind of work with finite spacing. And he had to for a big part of the season because you had Russell Westbrook and Clint Capella logging some minutes together, even though that wasn't when the Rockets were at their best. And I don't know that I would he would be my first choice for Philly. I think grading coaches is just so hard. I would probably like someone who's going to, I guess, I don't even know. Maybe Mike D'Antoni is the best fit. You could say that you want someone who is going to optimize their offense with the personnel they have, but I'm really not sure who that is. It's Kenny Atkinson. Like, he'll give them the shot profile. Like, he's the coach most likely to force Ben Simmons to take threes, but I don't necessarily know what that translates to. I doubt that they're willing to go the first-time head coach route. I don't know that they're going to necessarily be looking for a defense-first guy either. Ty Lue feels like he would make sense there, just as someone who would hold them accountable, and he's also a pretty good offensive mind when you're looking at his track record. So he'd probably be my top pick. I don't know where D'Antoni necessarily lands, though, beyond that. But that's a good question because it's topical. But no, team should not be hiring a coach because he might help them get a player they don't need him to get down the line who might not necessarily even become available. Just bizarre reasoning if that is even 10% of why they're not 10%, but like if it's 20% of the reason you're hiring Mike D'Antoni is because he might give you a chance at landing in elder James Harden in free agency. No, there's a chance that if the Rockets are really going to implode and James Harden gets that itch to leave in 2022, he becomes available via trade, perhaps, depending on how the Rockets wrap up next season, obviously. And Philly's going to have the ammo unless they make a ton of moves before then to go after him, and you don't need Mike D'Antoni for that. Next question comes from Avid Indoorsman, which is a great Twitter name right now during these times. Is Jaylen Brown going to be worth his contract? I believe he's at 4 years and $107 million, which includes guarantees and then likely incentives. And then he has about $8 million in unlikely incentives, so it could come up to $115 million. I'm going to say yes, and I don't know that it's much of a debate for me. He is we've seen him branch out on offense where he can dribble into these jumpers and he can put pressure on the rim if he's going to put the ball on the floor, but he is very plug and play on offense otherwise. If you're looking for him to make what seems like Jason Tatum has done, like that sized of an improvement as a passer, it doesn't feel like it's going to come. He's never shown that knack for making the less obvious passes, and he does feel like he gets tunnel vision still when he does put the ball on the floor. But the fact that he can take them, we've seen it during the playoffs too, like these side dribble jumpers, like that's huge. But to have him just be plug and play there, someone who's going to give you this season basically 20 points per game on super above average 3-point shooting, that's monstrous, in large part because of what he does on the other end. And Marcus Smart's going to be the guy who gets all defense honors. I feel like people talk about what Tatum does defensively more, maybe because he breaks up. It feels like more plays when he's allowed to do more off the ball. But Jaylen Brown really makes this defense hum. It's because of him at least partially that they can play smaller at points, since he will match up against bigger guys and he's a pretty good presence on the glass. The other thing is that he's going to be the one that spends collectively the most time against the top options. Like you're definitely going to have a Marcus Smart in that conversation, and you can definitely make a case that he is maybe their most versatile defender. But when you look at this is per Krishna Narsu of B-ball index, Jaylen Brown spent more time on both number 1 and number 2 options than any other player on the Celtics this season. And that's like when you have that type of defender, I don't know how, like, I don't even know how to necessarily quantify that, but um, he allows Boston to just do so many different things. And I'm misspeaking again. He spent the second most amount of time on number 1 and number 2 options because it was Marcus Smart. I was double checking that because it didn't look right when I was looking at my notes there. So having someone who can do that while also going up against like the bigger guys, like those actual fours where he's going to probably give up at points, maybe some size, maybe definitely some pounds. I don't have a problem with that contract at all. And I think what also helps is that Boston's in a different position where they're not necessarily even looking for him to be their number 2. They have that with Tatum and Walker. They can let him settle into that number 3, number 4 role on some nights if you're going to keep Gordon Hayward around. And the fact that they're paying him on purpose to be their number 3, not that they're paying him to be their number 2, and then he just ends up being, an Evan Fournier or something like that on offense, I'm talking about. I think that gives them the luxury to give him that money. And look, just what he does on defense, it's just, I think it far and away exceeds perception of what he does on defense, at least nationally. I'm sure Boston fans are well aware of how good he is there. Next question comes from, I apologize for mispronouncing this in advance, Inoshima Donmasi. What was the worst contract? Tobias Harris, Al Horford, Timofey Mozgov, or Eddie Curry? So Eddie Curry, just as a refresher, signed a 6-year, $60 million deal with the Knicks in 2005. I think that was a sign and trade. That was, when you go back to the salary cap, like that was a ton of money. And then the 6 years is scary. Timofey Mozgov signed 4 years, $64 million in the summer of 2016. It was the Lakers that gave him that contract. Shout out Mitch Kupchak and Bus. God, why did I forget his name already? I already forgot the Bus brothers' name. But shout out to them for handing out that contract. Then you have Tobias Harris, who got 5 years, 180 this summer, and then Al Horford got 4 years, 109, but only 97 of it is guaranteed. When you look at the balance of theirs, Mozgov's was technically expiring this year, but he didn't play in the NBA this year. Tobias Harris has like 4 years and 142.3 or something like that left on his deal. And then Al Horford is at 3 years and $81 million, $69 million guaranteed. This actually wasn't a hard question to answer for me. It's Timofey Mozgov, just because at least, look, the Horford and Harris contracts, if you kept Jimmy Butler, I don't think the Harris contract looks as bad. And for Horford, like maybe he's worth this money or close to it, but for a different team. And Harris is 147.3, not 142.3 over the next 4 years. And then with Curry, so he signs that deal just before his age 23 season. Like that's not ridiculous to do when he was coming off 16 points, 5 boards a game. I think he had his conditioning problems. You knew that he wasn't going to be this great defender, but it was at least a worthwhile gamble in the sense that he was young and he was gettable. And so why not give him that money? Like that contract finished before his age 30 season. That doesn't make it turned out to be a terrible deal, but that doesn't make it a terrible investment. Mozgov just never showed any sort of volume on the offensive end. And like he proved to be semi-valuable defensively. You look at the Cavs title in 2016, what he was able to do, but just the direction that the league was headed, even at that time, like it was moving away from these more plodding, lumbering bigs. And so even if you weren't counting on him to give you anything offensively, which you couldn't really, you had to at least have like some semblance of thought that this wasn't even Bismack Biyombo when you're looking at his mobility. Like how much of an asset is he going to be to you defensively? And look, at that point, he was about to go into his age 30 season. Like he wasn't even that young. So I think it's Timofey Mozgov by far and away. If I had to rank these, I'd probably go Mozgov was the worst. Curry would be the second worst of the bunch. I go back and forth on the Horford-Harris deals. When you look at the situation specifically, the Horford deal was probably more egregious, but Harris, 4 years and 147.3 million left, 5 and 180 for a guy who's probably best suited as your number 3, provided your first 2 guys aren't essentially non-shooters or like, an Embiid and a Simmons. Like you need to have another top tier wing or top tier shot creator next to him. I don't know. I'm going to say Harris, and then I'm going to say Harris's was better than Horford's. So Mozgov's was the worst of these 4, then Eddie Curry, then Horford, then Harris. I mean, at least he's still like on the younger side. That's the other thing that people forget, and including myself, like I look at it too, is Tobias Harris has been on a zillion teams, feels like he's been around forever. He just turned 28 this past July though, so this contract isn't going to take him like into his twilight years. The wait is finally over. Football is back. You might not be at a game this year, but you can still be in on the action at BetOnline. BetOnline is going the extra mile to make sure you can get in on every possible chance to win this season. From game spreads and totals to team, player, and coaching props, BetOnline gives you more options to wager on than anywhere else. You can get in on their season opening bonuses today and start off wagering on wins, division odds, and championship futures all day, every day. Head to BetOnline today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Don't forget to use promo code BLUEWIRE, all one word, at betonline.ag. That's Blue Wire, all one word. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Wrapping up with, I think, the final two questions that we're getting into. What kind of this comes from at Galaxy Brain with an E at the end of that. What kind of money will Boogie Cousins sign for, and where would he be a good fit? Please say the Nuggets. I could see it. You have Millsap and Plumlee are free agents this summer. Maybe if you re-sign Jeremy Grant as a player option as well, and you want him to soak up more backup 5 minutes, and you go with him and Bol behind Nikola Jokic, that would be fine. But if you can get Boogie on the cheap, like having him take on half of Plumlee's minutes, and then you experiment more with Bol and maybe Millsap's back, who knows? But there's room for a big in Denver is what I'd say, unless you're going to just all out go into Bol next year, which I would be kind of surprised if they did that. Mason Plumlee, let's just assume he leaves. Like, he's leaving 17 minutes a game behind. And so that's not going to be made up by more Jeremy Grant at the 5 minutes, if they even go there, and Bol. Even if you bring Millsap back, like, there would still be, you would think, like, they could float 15 minutes around, because Millsap's minutes shouldn't even really be expanding, since he's going to be going into, I believe, his age 36 season. So Denver is a potential fit. After that, I could see Dallas if it's cheap enough, because they don't have Dwight Powell, and they do seem reticent to want to bill Kristaps Porzingis as a 5. He has his own injuries to deal with. But even in the minutes when he's not on the court, like, they might just need another center. I don't know how far Boban gets you. Will they bring Willie Cauley-Stein back? He was one of the players who opted out of the bubble for them, and he has a player option for $2.3 million. Well, if he picks it up, maybe that makes a big less important for them to get. Some people float around the fact that he would return to Golden State. I don't really see that happening. Maybe if Houston wanted to have one big on the roster, they were actually going to play, depending on who they hire as a head coach. That's a possibility. I thought about maybe the Los Angeles Clippers, just because a lot of people think Noah might end up in Chicago now as sort of a mentor for the Billy Donovan hire, which, quick comment on that, 4 years, $24 million deal. I think a lot of people were puzzled when they looked at him leaving Oklahoma City for Chicago, and they thought he wanted to be in a more win-now situation. My guess would be a lot of it has to do with the guaranteed years, where there's a 2-year extension on the table for the Thunder. He gets a 4-year deal from the Bulls, and he might just like their roster a little bit better, because the Thunder's future is, like, theoretical, because Dennis Schroeder, Steven Adams come off the books next year. Gallinari might leave in free agency this year. They're probably going to trade Chris Paul. So you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You have Lou Dort, of course. Can't forget about him, and Darius Bazley. But then you're just dealing with all these picks. And so at least you're trafficking in more known quantities with Chicago. Maybe they're not the best, but if you really like Kobe White, and then Zach LaVine is a good tough shot maker, probably better off if he can be the number 2, if not number 3. Wendell Carter Jr. has to intrigue Billy Donovan as sort of this baby Al Horford type player. People like Larry Markkinen, like, he can still look. He's a good stretch 4. I just don't know that we've seen him add any more depth to his offensive bag. Part of that's on Jim Boylan for, last season it was throwing him too many grenades late in the shot clock and in the post, and then this year he just didn't feel all that involved. So I do see the reasoning for Billy Donovan going from Oklahoma City to Chicago. Nice little tangent there. But with the Clippers, like, Patrick Patterson's probably gone. What if JaMychal Green leaves in free agency? He's a player option. They have Ivica Zubac, but Montrezl Harrell would be, like, kind of the name I'm looking at here. Is like, what if he leaves in free agency? Because he definitely cost himself money with his performance in the bubble. There aren't a ton of teams with cap space. But maybe a Charlotte just comes calling, and it doesn't take that much to get him out of Los Angeles, because the Clippers realize, well, we want to pay Marcus Morris, and he's just going to give us more positional flexibility. And maybe they have to think about even giving JaMychal Green a little bit of raise should he opt out. So just Trez become collateral damage of that, and maybe Boogie makes some sense there. Miami would be kind of interesting. Like if you're talking about needing to rehab his career, would he be able to get through the high conditioning threshold that they set after so many injuries? But having him back up Bam, I don't know if they necessarily need those type of minutes, but Myers Leonard's a free agent this year, and who knows how much they actually wanted to play if they bring him back next year. Udonis Haslem doesn't play and is probably going to retire. Kelly Olynyk could opt out. Probably won't decline his player option, but also, Kelly Olynyk minutes they're roller coastery or touch and go somewhere along those lines. Other teams that could use him, just thinking like really quickly, it gets kind of tough. Like I think I would probably end that there. There's if Portland is looking for a backup big, but you have Zach Collins and Yusuf Nurkic there, even if Hassan Whiteside leaves. Would the Toronto Raptors be interested if they lose Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka, and who knows what happens with Chris Boucher? They still have Pascal Siakam at the 5 arrangements that I think they should explore more frequently, but they could end up needing a big. And then there's of course Washington, where just he has the ties to John Wall, and they have Mo Wagner, they have Thomas Bryant, but like that's not enough. You shouldn't be playing Davis Bertans at center if you're hoping to get any stops. Not that DeMarcus Cousins will be much better. He'll still be much better, but he's never been this great defender. And now when you're looking at the Achilles, the ACL injury, like that's just going to be tough to come back from. As far as his cost, I would be shocked if he gets even the taxpayers mid-level at this point, which would be a hair over $5 million. I would think more along the lines of the biannual exception would make sense for him. Maybe he even ends somewhere if he wants to just play for a concrete winner, like a Clippers team, and is promised minutes there, that he would sign for the veterans minimum, trying to reboot his value. But if he gets, I'll be shocked if he gets more than the taxpayers mid-level exception, and so that basically puts him within range of everybody in the league if he does fall into that price point. I believe we have one more question left. This one comes from Adam Polio. How does PIPM work? Player impact plus minus. Herro scored lots of points in game 4, I'm assuming, and the eye test says he's playing well, but the box metrics mark him as a negative 0.4 player, which is good for a rookie, but not for a player. Is there a paper describing its method? NBA math, Adam Frommel, me, we have nothing to do with player impact plus minus, so I don't want to riff on it for them. Jacob Goldstein would be the person to ask about this. What I'll do is, though, let's look at game 4 against Boston specifically, where Herro just absolutely goes off. He has 37 points on 14 of 21 shooting, also added in 3 assists, and yet he was a -4. So people that are citing this, if they are citing it, -4 in a 3-point game is not that big of a deal. If it was -12 in a 3-point game or something, that's when you start to get the red alarm fire. And so what I'm kind of do is I like to then poke around the lineups that he was in to see maybe where those struggles came from. And so you look at that with Tyler Herro in game 4. He spent the most amount of time playing with Bam Adebayo and then Andre Iguodala, and he was a -4 during his minutes with Andre Iguodala. But the thing that stands out to me is in 19 minutes with Jay Crowder on the court and Tyler Herro, the Heat were a -13. So you start to poke around those lineups and see, well, who were they kind of playing with? And they spent some time with the one that stands out to me here is the Iguodala, Tyler Herro, Jay Crowder combination was a -9 in 10 minutes. And then Adebayo, Herro, and Crowder was a -8 in 12 minutes. And then the Butler, Crowder, Herro trio, a -8 in 15 minutes. So some of these trios are being combined together. And if you look at Herro's most used lineup in game 4, it's Iggy, Dragic, Butler, Adebayo, and then Herro himself. They were a +3 in 12 minutes. His second most used lineup was a -4 in just 6 minutes. That had Robinson, Iggy, Butler, Crowder, and Herro himself in there as well. What I'm basically getting at is I think you need to dig deeper into the lineups, especially when you're working with a smaller sample size in the playoffs, and particularly when you're working with a rookie. Those lineups are going to matter. And so when you're looking at the context of Miami's lineup specifically, you probably need to go back and watch and say, well, who are these lineups going against? When you just look at the players that were on the court with him, they're going up against Boston's starters. And so when the Celtics had it cooking in game 4 specifically, that would just be a bad time to go on the floor. And so you can have those sort of finite stretches, even if you win, where you get torched, and that could totally upend a player's plus minus. Like, it's so dependent on who they play around. To what extent player impact plus minus is affected by that, I honestly don't know. Those catch-all metrics usually try to take into account personnel that's around them, but I think you have to look at the context of the game more specifically. And I always just go back to the lineups. Who were they on the court with? What were the results and some of their most used combinations? Or in this case, were there sort of these more sparingly used ones where they were just absolutely torched for some reason? That's going to do it for me, though. Let's, as always, please, before we get into this Bucks interview, as always, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you're getting your podcast. Download every episode. And whether or not you're on iTunes, just once more, I want to throw it out there, please. Throw us a rating, 5 stars only. Write a review. It helps us out a ton. We appreciate every single one of you. But now let's talk some Milwaukee Bucks with the Gyro Steps, Ty Windisch. Ty, welcome to your first appearance on the Hardwood Knocks podcast. It's taken me too long to ask you to come on, so I thank you for gracing me with your presence and in advance your insight on the Milwaukee Bucks. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. You know what? I think the wait, and every day I've woken up thinking, is this the day I'm going to get the Hardwood Knocks invite? Is today the day, Hector? The wait made it all the sweeter. I'm on cloud 9 right now. I'm doing great. I'm somehow happy to talk Bucks, even in the year of our Lord 2020, the latter part of it at least. I'm doing well, though. I'm ready to go. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, please, thank you for coming on. I can confirm that you're the first person that would ever be excited to come on this podcast. So you are doing me the favor. And look, let's get right into the Bucks here. So I don't want to rehash what just happened too much with them, but given the way the playoffs ended, what is just your general impression of this team, or maybe how it ended? Or are you even, maybe more surprised that, I know there was some stuff trying to be drummed up in the media, but it doesn't seem like internally there was this red alarm fallout necessarily, aside from Giannis meeting with, the upper brass, which isn't really, I would expect that to happen anyway. Mike Budenholzer is still there. The reports are that he's safe. Are you at all surprised there wasn't more of a reaction, or is this kind of just what you expected, and maybe you are just a little bit numb to how the season ended? Because it seems like you, looking at people who cover the Bucks specifically, sort of saw it coming at least at the beginning of the second round, if not earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think I am still very underwhelmed by the Bucks' response to this, and both from what I've read and what's been out there in The Athletic and ESPN and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and all the other great work. What I've heard too, and in some conversations, with some folks regarding the Bucks and how their front office and their brain trust is looking at this. Mm-hmm. I think the team is putting a lot of stock in bubble weirdness and in the fact that there were so many things off. And I know specifically not having home court is something they look at a big way. I think Aaron Rodgers tweeted this, and he is technically a Bucks minority owner. So this technically is Bucks ownership, although that's not this is not all I'm referring to as his tweet, but he said there's no way they're losing, in 5 if they play these games in 5-serve. And look, are they inherently wrong about the weirdness probably not being good for them? No, I don't think they're wrong. I actually did think the break was going to help the Bucks, who were beat up and sputtering heading into it. Clearly it didn't, but I think it's just too easy and too convenient to hand wave it and go, no, Bud is fine and the roster is largely fine, although it looks like they're not saying that, and I know we'll get into that later. But I do think there's a bit too much hand waving and just saying oh, it's the bubble, because other teams are performing in the bubble, right. Denver and LA and Boston and obviously Miami. They were able to come and execute, and the Bucks are old, but some of these other rosters are old too. With the level of talent the Bucks have, they certainly should not have gone. What did they go 5-5 in the bubble? They obviously lost in the second round. I think it's the more I talk about it and think about it, I'm starting to get quietly upset over here. It shouldn't be acceptable. I think there should be some very broad changes, and we might get them still. But I do think that there's a little bit too much calmness. Although it sounds like Giannis is working with the Bucks going forward, so maybe they're not being too calm. But still, I would be a little bit more reactive and react a little more strongly to this if it was up to me, because I just think what happened. And I know we don't want to rehash it entirely, but from a Bucks person, I'll put it plainly, it was embarrassing and it was a failure. And it's the kind of thing that you thought they didn't have a chance to do this and maybe keep Giannis. Now it seems like maybe they do. You certainly can't do it twice. So you cannot afford another flame out like this in the postseason.
No, you can't. And I hate criticizing coaches, probably unless their name was Jim Boylan. Because like they're just every coach is just so much smarter than me and can think and see the game in ways that I could only dream of thinking and seeing it. But some of what was happening in the playoff series just seemed like too obvious. Like I try not to, unless I'm making a joke, like I try not to really buy into just like the Twitter herd talk, whatever you want to call it. But it did seem simple at the beginning, before Giannis's ankle injury, play Middleton and Giannis more and don't ever let there be a second where both of them are on the bench, most certainly. And stuff like that just feels like these more basic failures because those are things that were easily controllable. Look, if Giannis gets injured regardless, like that gives you a built-in excuse, but because it seems like there were so many things you didn't do before that, you're kind of suffering the fallout from that. But the other thing I would add is I don't know if you would be a proponent of getting rid of him. I just don't know where the necessarily the upgrade is. Maybe you could point to anyone who would say, well, any coach that's willing to just shape shift more, if you want to call it that, in the playoffs might be an upgrade. But I don't know that you go out there and any of the free agent coaches, whether it's a trendy assistant name, a first time head coach, or one of the big wigs like a Ty Lue or Mike D'Antoni, necessarily get you that much further. It seems like this might be more of the way the roster is built type of thing than necessarily the coaching. Even though, again, I do think in parts of this playoffs, the coaching was definitely a huge problem.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I do think, and this is something that was pointed out to me, because I don't think I'm at the point where I really don't think it's going to happen unless Giannis kind of in his own way suggests it, which I can't honestly see him doing. I mean, this is something people bring up all the time when there's kid rumors, and this will be brought up against Bucks fans who rightfully go, that guy is a terrible head coach. They go, oh, but Giannis loved him. Giannis didn't want him to be fired. Giannis also loved Larry Drew. Giannis also currently loves Mike Budenholzer. Giannis loved Michael Carter-Williams. The list of people Giannis loves on the Bucks is pretty much the whole team. I mean, the guy gets along with people. He's extremely loyal. That's just who he is. So I'm worried we're probably stuck with at least one more year of Bud. I don't think he's a bad coach. I certainly don't think he's stupid. I do think he's so, and trust me, there are people who are. I don't know if you remember #FireKid on Bucks Twitter, but it was like everyone had the same Avi and it spread, and yes. Every reply to every, yeah. So it's Fire Bud is a thing now. The Avies are out there. They've been commissioned. They exist. They're in the wild. I think they're gonna grow. But I just think there's like you said, the rigidness, the lack of fluidity. He has such a firm belief in his system and how well it works, and playing everybody on the freaking roster who's active every night, and not overtaxing Giannis, and not just running a bunch of play calls, but going with this motion offense and everything else. And the issue is, he was the coach's poll coach of the year and I think runner-up to the actual coach of the year award, and the Bucks led the regular season in wins again. And all of these things are regular season accolades because that's where those things pay off the most. You saw it with the Hawks, and now you see it with the Bucks. And we know what happens every year when Mike Budenholzer goes up against a team slightly less talented or equally talented or more talented with a coach who is willing to adapt and coach in the playoffs the way most coaches do. It doesn't go well for the Bucks. The series starts off, and maybe there's a couple punches thrown either way. The Miami series, we didn't even get that. And then the other team adjusts, and Bud really doesn't. And then you give up 4 straight wins. I mean, it's rough, and that's just how it's gone. So I do think they need a replacement. I think Ty Lue would be great. I think some of the promising assistants would be good. I know some people on Bucksland have pointed out, like, Nick Nurse was a first-time head coach. Steve Kerr was a first-time head coach, although he had been in a front office. And those are maybe pie in the sky, but I do see the vision and the idea of, like, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out how to use this roster. And it's just not being used right well in the postseason. And I just want to touch on one more thing. I'm talking a ton. I'm sorry.
No, love it. Keep going.
So there's a little blowback on the Giannis. I don't want to even say blowback, but Bucks people will tell you, and they're not wrong. They're correct. I agree. Giannis does get really tired. And I think part of it might be because, he plays 29 minutes a game in the regular season and still puts up all these stats, but whatever. There's maybe it's if they ramped his minutes up earlier, he would be able to play 40 plus in the playoffs. Right now, he can't. Fine. Even so, Khris Middleton can. Khris Middleton's always been able to. So like Khris not playing 42 to 44 minutes a night is just foolishness. It's just foolishness. And then obviously it's very easy to, as you mentioned, stagger their minutes. If Khris plays almost the whole game, just make sure Giannis plays the other 6 minutes and you're covered. So like this is not that, and again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm smarter than Mike Budenholzer. I am not. But this is not that complicated. Like his commitment to doing Bud stuff is just too great, and it's not conducive to winning. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I don't know, shame on Bud. Like, I don't know. Both of my hands are on my head now. This is where we're at in covering this. But yeah, I do think they should have gone for another coach. But I also think they have roster issues as well. I don't think it's a magic fix-all, which I think is what I was going to say when I started this, but I got sidetracked by Bud stuff, which happens.
The one thing I'll say here, and I do think the Bucks are part of this, the Clippers might be the other evidence for me right now, is I'm just prepared more than ever to buy into postseason results compared to regular season, like more so than I ever would. And not to the point where it's like, well, the Clippers need to trade Paul George now, but where that team clearly needs like an infusion of playmaking, an infusion of locker room stability. If it's not going to be Kawhi's voice, like I don't know if Pat Bev, Lou Williams / Trez, who those guys are going to want to go 82-0, and they'll be that loudly, which is great. I don't know if that's the right fit for those teams. And I think you could say the same with the Bucks now, and it probably helps that now we have postseasons' worth of evidence for it. But that's just where I'm at, where I'm more so prepared, even post-bubble. I know that these are just unprecedented circumstances, and I know that they dealt with the Giannis injury, but just looking at what's happened between this playoffs and last playoffs, yes, it's such a small sample size compared to their regular season dominance, but there's clearly a difference, and it transparently matters now, and it feels like this roster, you don't get rid of Giannis, you don't get rid of Khris Middleton, but it almost feels like anything other than that should be on the table.
This is going to sound wild to anyone who may have followed me on Twitter or wherever for any amount of time, because I deeply, deeply love the man's game. If the right offer is out there, I am not close to trading Khris Middleton. At this point,
oh no, we're going to have words.
We might have to. I love Khris, I really do, and I think it's most likely that they don't, just because I don't think there's going to be an upgrade out there that is like enough of an upgrade to make it worthwhile. But if somehow, some way, there was like a truly elite player, and especially a truly elite offense initiator out there, I think you kind of have to do it. Like I said, they should be in a controlled panic mode. Like the circumstances that have gotten them here are unacceptable. I don't think it should be tenable to mostly run it back. So, and it hurts me to say I would much rather keep him. And we're talking like players who I don't think will be available. Like if Brad Beal, for whatever reason, is available, but the asking price is Khris Middleton, I think I go for it at this point. Ooh. And again, pains me to say that. And I don't think Brad Beal is available anyway, but just like a player who can initiate offense and be that perfect pick and roll partner with a better handle than Khris, which is really his one shortcoming at this point, I would go for it just because I feel like you need to be in that let's just try something else that might work mode.
I guess if you could tell me Bradley Beal was going to defend like he did 3 or 4 years ago, maybe I would do that. I'm just super bullish on Khris Middleton. I had him as a top 10 guy this past regular season. That obviously doesn't happen in a normal year where Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, even Paul George and Joel Embiid just play more. And all the points you just make are fair, but I almost feel like that if there's an issue with him being the number 2, part of it at least stems from the fact of how Giannis can be limited in the playoffs. And maybe it also relates the other way where, well, Giannis can be limited because Khris Middleton is his number 2. But when Giannis doesn't even yet have enough counters, even though it seems like he's clearly just looking at the numbers and the volume, he's more comfortable dribbling into threes just when he brings the ball up the court, or he has those, he'll pull up from mid-range or he'll shoot these turnarounds, but there clearly aren't enough efficient counters for him against defenses to where he's made life easier on the rest of his teams in a way that you would necessarily expect. And so it definitely works both ways, but I feel like there does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect in how Khris Middleton is viewed in that number 2 discussion. Because if you want, Stephen Curry to be Giannis Antetokounmpo's number 2. You want Giannis to have a number 1 as his number 2. Like, that's just where I kind of land with it.
That's totally fair. Honestly, I think their limitations really hurt each other in painful ways. Like, I think if Giannis does have, and like I'll throw Kawhi out there as an example. I mean, he's never going to have Kawhi jumper. But if he had some sort of semblance of true 3-level scoring, like, 30% worse from anywhere but the rim, but as good as he is now at the rim, then it probably doesn't matter that much if Khris Middleton does not have that elite handle. Then it's like, okay, fine. It doesn't matter. Like, he's just going to be playing off ball. He's going to be in that. I mean, I guess I shouldn't use this comp because it failed so badly, but in that Paul George sort of role,
right.
Where, like, he's like catching the ball against a compromised defense, and he can go to work, and it's easy for him, and he gets a lot of spot up shots. I think, yeah, he'd be just fine. But I think the fact that Giannis can't do those things, or at least like was not comfortable and not able to do those things in the playoffs, mean that his role becomes so much harder. I mean, you need to find smart ways to post him up, which the Bucks aren't good at. You need to run him as the roll man and pick and roll, which the Bucks don't do enough of. And I have a take on this, but I'm going to hold on to it for now. Or you need to like just have him charge at 5 defenders, which is like the thing he does way, way too often, and it makes my head hurt. And it works sometimes because he's Giannis, but it doesn't work a lot because it's 5 guys.
Right.
And I just think like that's the part where like you can maximize Giannis even as is, even without, some hopeful of his own game adaptations that he will make to break down this wall, which it was disappointing and a failure on his part that he wasn't more ready to do this. He doesn't skate through all criticism of that. I mean, he knew what defenses were going to do until the very early part of the last game. He was not able to sort of counter that. So that's a disappointment for him too. He does not escape without blame. But like Khris is not a great pick and roll ball handler. He's good. The pick and roll with Khris and Giannis works well, and the Bucks should use more of it. But he is not like a Kyrie or Beal or Steph or whoever with the ball. Like, he's not going to just like completely break down a defender or like dribble through a lot of traps. He can pull up from anywhere. He has that in his game, but he just can't get all over the court comfortably. And if he were able to do that, then Giannis off ball becomes a whole nother set of problems. So I do think their limitations play into each other, which is why if a real elite ball handler is available, it's not that I think they're that much better than Khris. It's that I think they might be a better fit to sort of mesh with Giannis a little bit better.
I think I can buy into that. I think my biggest qualm with him has long been like his game feels like it stalls out before the rim. But if you're going to factor in the ball handling as well, then that's not really something that I gave as much consideration to. This is the question. I'm not sure if you're tired of answering it yet. You said you weren't when we first talked about this podcast, but let's start with the short part of it. Giannis is Supermax. Do you think he's signing it before next season? Yes or no?
I actually do now.
Okay.
I actually do. And I don't think it means...
And a lot of people in Bristol are really upset with this answer right now. I'm just throwing that out there to you.
I totally get that. I don't feel for them at all, but I totally get that. I think he does at this point just because I think clearly he's not all the way out, right? Like, he already met with the Bucks, and I think if there was bad news at that visit, I think we'd have some sort of an idea of it by now, and he plans to meet with them again after his vacation, which who knows, maybe he changes his mind and he's gone. But it doesn't seem to me like he's out. It seems to me like, and this is his public quotes and the reporting on this meeting from like 1,000 different sources, that he wants to work with the Bucks to improve, and he wants to get better. He wants to win in Milwaukee, at least for one more year. Why I think he resigns? I don't think he wants those folks in Bristol to have this content every single game, every single media availability. Everyone knows. Everyone involved knows. There's going to be so many questions. Where are you going? Why haven't you resigned? Blah, 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 blah. It'll be endless. Giannis hates that stuff, man. Giannis is a quiet dude. Giannis's camp is silent all the time. I remember one time Giannis was on TMZ, and he looked so bothered about the guy following him and asking him questions. And it was like Bucks Twitter had a field day. We were like, we're never going to lose him. No one does that to him here. People just like quietly gawk at him when he's in restaurants because that's how Midwesterners do business. So I do think that it would make sense then on that front. And obviously the Bucks have obvious reason to want to get this done. But Giannis can get all that goes away. He literally can't be traded for a year. It seems like he's committed for the long haul to the Bucks. They become less interesting, which kind of works for Giannis. However, I don't think he's going to say, I for sure am going to be a Buck for the next 6 years, just based on how poorly they did in this postseason, how few assets they have going forward. So my idea, and I wrote about this today, what if there's just kind of a quiet understanding between both sides? Like, I'm going to sign it now. I'm going to get my money locked up. We're going to be in a long-term deal. But in 1 year, 2 years, if we're not going where I think we should be going, if I'm not happy, if we're not winning, and that's his number one thing, he wants to win more than all else, then like even with 4 or 5 years left on my deal, which this never happens, but even with all those years left, you're going to trade me. Like, just trade me if I want out. We'll work together. We'll find the right place. Like, let me get out early. So I think it would be like a little shady. And I mean, like, I don't know if this is like legal under the CBA, but newsflash to anyone listening, teams and players don't listen to the CBA on almost all accounts.
No, what you just mentioned is probably one of the least shady things that could possibly happen in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even got into like if he's gonna have like shares of X company or whatever. Like, I think Dirk worked for the Mavericks when he was a player with the Mavericks. Like, stuff happens, folks. Stay woke. But I could absolutely see that being the case, where there's sort of a mutual understanding that like we're not gonna hardball you and not trade you if you ask out after a year, like between seasons, which I think is how he would handle it. And the no trade part would expire by the point where he said he wanted to stay through his current contract anyway. So I just think that sort of like nod, wink, wink. Let's get the media off our backs. Let's look more attractive to players we want to recruit and get to play here, because maybe a Brad Beal, and I don't want to keep using that name. I don't want to make it seem like I think that's possible, but that's just like the example name. I think that player is a lot more likely to come to Milwaukee if Giannis is under contract for 6 years as opposed to 1, and there's constant questions about if he's leaving. So I think he signs it. Very long-winded way to say I think he signs it, but I don't know if that means he's actually going to be a Buck until like 2026.
That would not surprise me if that's a scenario, and we've talked about it on this podcast. He has leverage no matter how many years he has left on his deal. We just saw Paul George get out of Oklahoma City when he had 2 guaranteed years. Could have been 3 if he picked up that player option. Stars are going to have leverage in that way. You don't want a disgruntled star on your team. And if he's under contract for long term, you can maximize your value there. So if he comes to you, look, if Karl-Anthony Towns went to the Minnesota Timberwolves tomorrow and said he wants out, maybe it's a little bit different because he's on just his 2nd contract. But like Giannis is going to be on his 3rd. And so there's just a different level of clout that you have. And also the team just knowing like, well, there's only so many different avenues that we can explore at this point. And so he doesn't lose that leverage by re-signing. The thing that I said he should do, and it's been pointed out to me, what you just mentioned, he doesn't really like the speculation, so he wouldn't prefer this. But if I were Giannis, I would not sign the Supermax, even if I was intending to go back to Milwaukee, because then it really just screws with 2 of your biggest Eastern Conference competitors in Toronto and Miami, who presumably are going to remain a little bit in lurch for the next year while they're waiting for Giannis's free agency. And so you weaken them a little bit while still keeping some pressure on the franchise. The other argument I made is like you have a bigger hold on what the salary cap is going to be long term. So maybe you decide to sign a shorter term deal because there's going to be like another huge cap spike and you can get more money that way. And then also it still keeps pressure on the franchise. People pointed out that then you open yourselves up to what if he gets injured, yada, yada, yada. Giannis could suffer the most devastating injury that you can name, and he's going to get the max from Milwaukee next summer if he waits, or whenever next offseason happens. I shouldn't say next summer. So yeah, I was a proponent of that, but as you pointed out, and as others have too, he doesn't like the speculation, and so if you go without the contract, you have that speculation. So my one question would be, wouldn't that be kind of hysterical, though, if that's the approach that any player ever took? Like, let me kind of screw with these teams that think they have a shot with me. But my real question is, let's say he doesn't sign it, you're still not trading him. Like, you're obligated to play next season out, right? Unless he requests for out, which, as you kind of alluded to with he's not going to ask for a new head coach, he seems like maybe the least likely player in the NBA to request a trade.
Yeah, and he's the one thing he's really went to say, besides supporting his teammates and all that, the one thing he said is, like, some people see a wall and go around it. I want to go through the wall, which
is an offensive foul, but carry on.
Unfortunate analogy based on the way he played in the semis. But, yeah, I don't think he asks out. And I definitely don't think, like, unless he firmly says, like, I'm leaving and I don't even really want to play this year in Milwaukee. Like, I think even if, like, he's leaving, but he's still – and I think Giannis, I just think he's going to go 100% all the time. I don't think you can ever trade him unless he makes you trade him. I don't think there's any like there's no package to me that's worth it. No realistic one. I mean, you're not going to get like LeBron, Kawhi, KD, and Steph in a crazy 6-team deal. You're going to get like some fun young guys, some salary filler, and some picks. And it's like, okay, you look at like let's look at a team that did really well in quotes, like the Pelicans, right? Everyone says the Pelicans did so well. They got Jackson Hayes, Naw. I'm not gonna. I always feel like I'm gonna get one part of his name wrong. So
Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who is every draft, as someone who's not a draft expert, I zero in on like one or two players, and he was one of two last draft. So I apologize to his career trajectory in advance.
That was the first one. So Nickeil Alexander-Walker got it for me. This draft, my one is Maxey. I'm all in on Maxey. But
I thought it was going to be Sadiq Bey, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be Patrick Williams. So I apologize to Patrick Williams' career in advance as well.
Yeah, I was a big Denzel Valentine guy, so I think I have the same affliction that you have. But they get Naw, they get Jackson Hayes, they get a guy who I think they're hoping comes from Australia next year. And I think like 2 more picks and a pick swap or 2. Does that package give you a better chance to win a title than Giannis Antetokounmpo for 1 year? I don't think so.
Nope.
I don't think 8 years of Jackson Hayes, 7 years of some guy in Australia, and 4 moderately good to pretty bad picks is going to get you closer to a title than a 2-time reigning MVP, also a reigning MVP/DPOY. And I think your goal in the NBA should be to win a championship. I think if you're close, you just have to go for it. So I think, no, there's no realistic package out there that can justify moving a guy like Giannis, again, unless he absolutely says, trade me, in which case, yes, you begrudgingly take all the picks and bad, flawed young players and whatever else comes your way.
That would be the shock, though, to me. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he signs a Supermax. It wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't. It would surprise me if he doesn't and then requests a trade. Like, that would be the outcome that really surprises me.
Yeah, same here. I don't think it would make much sense at all. It would be such a sudden heel turn from him. And I think it would probably be like the one outcome that could make people immediately dislike Giannis. I don't even know if they would. I think some people would probably get it. I mean, this semis loss was pretty damn awful. But after saying, I think, that he was so dedicated and everything, if he then turned around and came back from vacation and got traded like a month or 2 after that very firm quote, I think it would be kind of a bad look. I guess it also depends where it goes, but
right.
I don't see it either. I'd be pretty surprised. I think he's either leaving in 2021 or I don't know. I guess like I laid out earlier, maybe any year after that, and we just won't know. I think the crux is on the Bucks to remain good. That's what matters, and I think it's good. I'm glad that pressure is on them. I think some front offices maybe need a little bit of a kick in the pants to not get complacent, and Giannis has certainly done that.
Yeah, look, you live with that if he leaves in 2021. I think if you ask the Thunder when it happened with KD in 2016, you ask the Cavs both times, like when they played it out with LeBron, like you live with it because Giannis is on that level of player. There are other players that you don't do it with. I think like, Paul George might be a good cutoff if like the Pacers, if he's going to leave or think he's going to leave, you get rid of him. But if it's a Kawhi, unless he asks her out like he did in San Antonio, and then look, Giannis, KD, LeBron, like those ilk of players. Now, I want to move on here first, and it's going to seem like a random pivot, but it sets up what we're going to talk about, which but I'm just giving the preface to our listeners. Donte DiVincenzo. I know. Giannis's free agency to Donte DiVincenzo. What a segue. He's there, when you look at their roster, he's like their one potential swing piece or high-end trade chip, perhaps, unless you're looking at one of their future firsts, if they put it unprotected and in play. I'm wondering, when we were doing 6 Man of the Year ballots, I had him third. I would have probably had him higher if he, played a little bit more. But he just did so much for the Bucks. Like his hands are everywhere. On defense, he ran point guard a little bit for them. He's not really that great of a shooter, but he can move off the ball okay. So I really liked him. But then the bubble comes around, and just to feel like his offense wasn't there. Have your impressions of him changed at all? Or what is your impression of him? What do you see his ceiling as? We kind of had a behind-the-scenes discussion about this when I was doing a fantasy league exercise for Bleacher Report's app about how some Bucks fans consider him an all-star, which, as someone who is high on Double D, I did not anticipate at all. But I'm just curious what you view him as, particularly after what happened in the bubble in the playoffs.
So he actually ended the playoffs fairly well. He was one of their best few players in about the last 2 games of the year. And I think I think what happened. I said they shouldn't even play him once the playoffs. He was that bad in the seeding games. I can't wait till that's a term we never have to use again for the rest of our lives. But he was so bad in those seeding games that I was like, don't even put him in the rotation. Of course, he played anyway because Bud, and that's the one Bud thing that worked out. He got it together by the end of the run, but I think he hit a delayed rookie wall. And I know he's in his second year, but an injury pretty much took him out of his first year, and he never played as much as he got to play this season. And I think the break plus that really caught up to him. But I'm glad that he kept his intensity, which is, I think, one of the best parts of his game. He really does. He really plays like he is an all-star, which I think is why people say that. Like, he takes some truly audacious shots, and a lot of them miss because he is not that. But I don't mind that he takes them most of the time. But I'm decently high on him. I would prefer not to move him. I don't like anyone else on the roster except Giannis. I don't look at him as untradeable. I would prefer not to because, like you said, I mean, he is the young core. I think like the next youngest player beside him who actually plays is probably Giannis. Bucks do not have a lot of draft. They blew a lot of draft picks, man. Pretty brutal if you look at their – like literally outside of Giannis from 2013 onward, there is not much there, except of course Malcolm Brogdon, who I'm contractually obligated to never talk about as a member of Bucks Twitter.
Oh boy,
as bad. But yeah, I think Dante's good. I think he's pretty good. I think it's one of those where, as much as you feel like you have to go all in if you're the Bucks on this next year to impress Giannis, which is also I think how they felt about this year.
You would hope, anyway.
You would, yeah, maybe not, but you would hope so. Maybe that's how I felt. Maybe that's not how the Bucks felt. You also have to think about like 3 years from now, because like again, if you're terrible around Giannis in 2023, you're probably not going to keep him that much longer. Like that's not what he's trying to do. I mean, he wants to be, when all is said and done, he wants to be seen as one of the greats. I mean, he idolized Kobe Bryant. He met with Kobe. He brought a notebook to literally take notes from Kobe Bryant. And Giannis is not a guy who works out with a lot of people, but he had that much respect for Kobe. And I think like if LeBron had recently retired, I think it'd be the same. I think he just has respect for greatness like that. And I think he wants to be up there in that pantheon. And he knows, these regular season stuff is great. He knows what you need to do to be looked at as one of those all-time greats. You got to win championships.
Right.
And the Bucks can't fail to do that around him. So that's why the Dante thing is tough, because as much as like, what if he's the breaking point in trying to outbid Philly for Chris Paul, who I guess the Bucks might not be interested in, but whatever. Like, do you include him to get that much better next year, but maybe you lose one of your few guys who's still on a rookie contract and seems promising? So I would prefer to keep him. I don't think it's a must, but I think he's good, and I think he adds a nice little bit of, like, aggressiveness to them that they really need. So I would be all for it if they found a way to keep him, as long as they don't keep, like, everybody else, too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just tough to Chris Paul's a different, and I'm obviously going to ask you about that. He's like a different case just because he makes so much money that, part of the asset is still as good as he is being willing to take on his contract. But like, if you're going for an actual, like if you're getting Drew Holiday, I don't know, we're trying to get him. I don't know how you even start without including DiVincenzo. And I've long been a proponent of distant first round picks can be really valuable to a franchise. I've talked about, the Pelicans having the Lakers 2024 first round pick with the ability to defer it till 2025. Like that could be, you don't know where LeBron's going to be at in his career. And yes, you still have Anthony Davis, but who's around him? Like that could be a really valuable first round pick. However, GMs can't necessarily think that far down the line, not only because of how often the NBA landscape changes, but because of their lack of job security in general. And so, taking on a pick in 2024, 2026, that's not necessarily the smartest move for your career. And so in the Bucks' case, then that leaves DiVincenzo. So I would, if you're getting a real player, like I think you have to give him up unless, you're also giving up you talked about a Khris Middleton. So maybe there are ways around that. But if you're trying to keep Giannis and Khris, I don't really see how you get a player like a high impact player without giving up Dante DiVincenzo in this case. And like, I feel like your best hope is to actually sell him to another team as this high upside prospect play.
Yeah, I think you have to. And you have to kind of hope they don't look too close to the fact that he's 23 already. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's why that was the appeal of a CP3, was that he seems gettable with keeping the powder dry on both Dante and Khris. And I don't think many players that good, probably any other players that good, are going to be obtainable without losing one or both of those guys. So I think, yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you can get Drew Holiday and not give up Khris Middleton for Dante, then I think you pretty much have to do it. Like, that's one where I've always said, like, if you can add that third guy without giving up Khris, then you're really cooking. Then you really have something, I think. And so then I think, yeah, trading Dante becomes a lot more palatable. The Bucks first, by the way, really just garbage picks that they have to offer. They have the 24th overall in this weird draft, and then they can't move one until either 2024 or 2025. And the way the picks on the pick that they currently owe Cleveland are set up, it could defer. So I think like the best they could offer of their own picks is a 2024 that might have to defer it till 2025 based on the Cleveland draft. And like you pointed out, this is a point I've been trying to make to folks as well. Like, unprotected first after Giannis could be long gone sounds great. But if you're trading an impact player and all you have to show for it is a bad late first rounder in this admittedly pretty bad draft, someone like Dante DiVincenzo or Eric Bledsoe, and a pick that might not show up for 5 years, that's very bad for your prospects of getting to actually use that pick. I mean, imagine you're watching somebody put up 30 points next to Giannis, and you've got like a nice prospect and a pick that's going to convey 4 years, a full election and change from now. You're not likely. GMs are not looking at that like salivating openly. It's not great for them to do that.
If it was Chris Paul, I think Oklahoma City could talk themselves into it just because he's only under contract for 2 years and so old. But yeah, you also have to think about, who's actually coming back. Like that's definitely part, like going to the Bucks in that scenario. I'll skip around here a bit then, since we're kind of like already touching upon it now. The Chris Paul stuff, where there was the rumor earlier on in the year that he wanted to go to Milwaukee. I don't know if you saw like the Twitter video that he posted after the Thunder were eliminated by the Rockets, but it felt final, like he was just gone. Then Billy Donovan, now head coach of the Bulls, he leaves Oklahoma City. It feels like they're going to enter that rebuild they were supposed to enter when they traded Paul George and Russell Westbrook. Now, I know there was a report from The Athletic that the sources who with knowledge of the Bucks thinking don't see them going that route. What do you sort of make of that? Like, do you believe do you believe that the Bucks aren't really going to look at Chris Paul? Is that more of a posture play? Because I do think money is going to have to come into it there too. 2 years and $85.6 million is a ton of money. He is coming off a second-team All-NBA season, but you have to look at it as, so we're going to have to give up stuff to bring this much money on our books. And players need to get paid. I'm for all the money that they can get. I'm never going to try and save billionaires cash. I will never absolutely do that. But this is just the way teams are going to think. And so I do think that there's a distinct possibility the Bucks are like, even if they have the opportunity to get Chris Paul, that they might just pass on it.
Yeah, which is deeply frustrating. And I agree with you on the billionaires part entirely. So the report that they were not, in fact, going to pursue Chris Paul, which certainly could be, a little bit of chicanery. It could be a smokescreen or whatever else, because there are probably other teams involved. Although it really seems like Philly, who's like, you might have to blurb this, so I apologize in advance, but it seems like the 76ers at every turn find a way to punch themselves in the dick very aggressively. It feels like they're going to somehow end up with Russell Westbrook and Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, which is just like such a nightmare for whoever they end up having as head coach. But aside from that, but Philly could get involved. Like the Bucks could be trying to, drive down the price or whatever. Who knows? But what was cited in that Athletic report, I believe that was Eric Name and Sam Amick.
Yeah.
Amick. I'm not – see, I used to be bad with names. I thought I got better. This pod, people are going to come away and say, he still doesn't know names.
Oh, no. As someone who has like a borderline speech impediment here, do not even – this podcast is used to it. I always apologize profusely, so don't worry about it.
All right. At least I'm in good company, or maybe bad company.
Yeah, bad company's more like it.
But the unfortunate thing about Chris Paul is the cost was cited, and then right after it said Milwaukee was worried about the cost, like the contract numbers were there, not like anything about assets, but just like how much money he literally costs. And if you look at like the deals that we've drawn up on Gyro Step and other people have, like Bledsoe, Hill, and Ersan Ilyasova get you there in like CBA salary matching, and then like for the trade to actually make real sense, like probably Bledsoe goes somewhere else, and like this team sends an asset and something to Oklahoma City. Like there's one where like either the Knicks or the Pistons get Bledsoe, and they send like either I think like Tony Snell, or like in the Knicks case, it's like 2 bad expirings. You can take your pick, and like some crappy pick or whatever. So they get like a nice point guard who won't have to worry about the playoffs and who will help raise their floors. And the Thunder get even more stuff and less money on their books. But that deal, that main deal, it's like just looking at the Milwaukee part, Chris Paul for those 3 guys, the Bucks take on $9.7 more million on their books this year. So like it's salary matching in CBA parlance, but it's not an exact match. So that's the thing where like that could put them up into the tax this year. I think it almost certainly would, unless they made some other drastic moves, which maybe they would. But again, like supposedly the Bucks just affirmed the honest that they're fine with paying the tax, but then like basically at the same time we're getting this report that Chris Paul's too expensive. So I don't know. I don't get it. I think he is. If you don't have to give up any real future assets, like if you can get it done, I don't know if you can. If you can get it done for like a few second round picks and those guys, I just don't see how you don't do it. It seems like such a low cost gamble to make, especially considering like how useless Bledsoe was in the playoffs, and George Hill was low-key bad in the playoffs this year as well. I think you kind of have to go for it, but frustratingly, it does sound like they're not as interested in that, which again, I don't know where else the path to improvement is necessarily, especially on that level, but that's where it sounds like the Bucks are at, unless it's a smokescreen, which fingers crossed.
Yeah, and look, so I'll gladly spend the billionaire's money. You get Chris Paul. I think the bigger issue for me, and this would be the valid concern, is that a lot of people have said that it's like sort of easy to build the framework of a deal with OKC, and I tend to disagree because if you're giving up, let's say it's Bledsoe, Lopez, and George Hill, like those are 3, as bad as Hill and as particularly Bledsoe the past 3 playoffs have were this past postseason, they're 3 major rotation players for you. And so Chris Paul's 35, he might be an upgrade if you're giving up 2 of them, but like he's not soaking up all those minutes. Maybe you believe that you can approximate the value of Brook Lopez a little bit better just because of how centers are used on the cheap in free agency. I don't know that. I'm not a big fan of how Brolo's deal is going to age, but I also think for what he does for you defensively now, and then combined with his 3-point volume, not necessarily always his efficiency, unless he's in Disney World apparently this year. I don't know that I would buy into that. And so to me, it becomes a matter of, can you build a deal where you're sort of, it's a poo-poo platter where it's, it's Eric Bledsoe, there's Ersan Ilyasova, there's Robin Lopez, assuming he picks up his player option, there's DJ Wilson, and that money gets you there to being able to take back Chris Paul. What can you sweeten it with? And I think one of the biggest ones, like, Dante DiVincenzo, obviously, but now you get into a situation where it's 5-for-1. The roster spot game is too difficult. And if you're OKC, unless you believe that you can flip some of those guys, the fact that they're not of immediate use to you, especially Bledsoe, who has 2 more guaranteed years left on his contract, that becomes a hang-up. And so one of the biggest sugar coatings that you could add to this, let's say, would be, can you reroute Eric Bledsoe somewhere to either into someone's cap space or for an actual asset? And a team that I've, you name some teams, but another team I've come back to, they have the most cap space in the NBA. Atlanta feels like they could use an Eric Bledsoe to play alongside a Trae Young. You have someone automatically who can just cover every other team's opposing point guard, and then even shooting guards if there's an opportunity to stash Trae on a point guard, which I feel like there almost never is. I don't know if they would need something to do that because they're kind of building up the Bucks in the process. I don't know if they would give up. They're not going to give up one of their young wings for him, but that's just a suggestion I have. If you can build something like that, that should be the goal. And if you're worried about giving up 3 of your most used players during the regular season for Chris Paul, I actually understand that stance. The money is just something I won't. Like, it's insofar as it's ever excusable, and if you have a contender, it's never going to be for me. But this is Giannis's, for now, contract year. Like, and even if it's not, if he's signing the Supermax, that's a vote of faith in you, and you're obligated to just leap into the tax this season. And so that's really the only, if you have to give up Bledsoe, Lopez, George Hill for Chris Paul, that's the one that would give me pause.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can do it, like some Bucks fans actually, this is just a side note, in our Euro group Discord for the listeners of the Gyro Step, one idea that's been circulating that I find actually kind of intriguing is like, if Houston is tearing down and bringing in a new coach who might actually want a center, like if you can get the Chris Paul deal done without trading Brook Lopez, maybe you swing Lopez over to Houston and pick up like some wing help from them, whether it's a Covington or maybe you buy really low on Eric Gordon or something like that, which I think that is interesting too, just to stock up the wings and kind of get more depth. Like I think today I looked at like Eric Gordon and Ben McLemore would work. I think McLemore's expiring next year. So something like that, just to stock up the depth a little bit. I agree these like 3, 4, 5 for one deals get super, super tricky. But I think like if you can do like Bledsoe, Hill, maybe even that Indy first, maybe OKC has some interest in that. Who knows? But Bledsoe, Hill, Ersan is like out of the rotation. So you basically consolidate your 2 okay point guards into one very good point guard, especially in the playoffs, for the cost of a pick and Ersan's salary. Then I think that becomes definitely a no-brainer. And again, I don't know if it's that easy or not, but if like I think Atlanta might have a bad first coming in. I know Detroit doesn't, but they have like all their seconds. Even if OKC can like facilitate Bledsoe to somewhere for like 2 seconds, even if they're sort of protected. Like, what bad team, really? I think Eric Bledsoe is looked at now as this big negative asset. I don't think that's true. I think a GM of a team like that, who was like, they would like to win some games and keep their jobs, as we already mentioned, this dynamic people tend to overlook a lot. Like, we can just get Eric Bledsoe for 2 bad seconds.
He might be a top 50 regular season player, which is a really good player.
Like, all defense, second team all defense this year. Like, he can play, and he's gonna help raise your floor a bit, especially for some of these teams. I mean, he's not like a great distributor, but he can pass a little bit. He can certainly play like with a ball dominant guy. Like if the Bulls didn't have Kobe White, I think he'd be a good LaVine fit. Maybe they'll get rid of LaVine and he can play next to Kobe White. But like these bad teams who need defense and really want to win at least a little bit, I think Bledsoe makes a lot of sense. I think you're gonna find. Like, I don't think that's going to be an impediment to the deal. I do think, personally, I think the Bucks would be able to get it done. I think OKC would like to send Chris Paul to somewhere he wants to go, like Milwaukee. I think OKC likes being looked at as one of those franchises to kind of make people forget the whole Harden thing. But, yeah, I don't know. If it comes down to it and, like, Chris Paul gets traded for nothing but salary filler, and it's pretty obvious the Bucks could have gotten in there, it will be, like, the latest and probably most disappointing chapter in the Bucks did something for X reason that also happened to save them quite a bit of money.
That is something I did not consider, that if Chris Paul gets sent somewhere for like a reasonable asking price that the Bucks like could have met without really feeling it, that the optics on that would be absolutely terrible.
Like if it's like a somehow like OKC, I don't think this would happen. It sounds like it makes sense for OKC.
Here's the example I'd give you, not to interject, but like if Philly gets him while giving up Al Horford, like the Bucks done fucked up somewhere, probably.
Yep. No, absolutely. I was thinking Tobias at first, but I think
fair too.
But I think Tobias can play. Honestly, like if Tobias got rerouted to the Bucks somehow, I probably wouldn't hate it. I don't think there's any way to keep Middleton and Giannis and him. Like I think he can play. I think he's fine. He's just not a max $30 million a year guy. He's like a 17 point per game guy, and that's fine. There's nothing against him, but they just saw him as something else for whatever reason. But yeah, the Horford, like if it's Horford and like who's the stretch for? Why am I blanking on his name? Whoever. If it's Horford and stuff, Horford, one of the worst.
Oh, from Philly, like Mike Scott or something.
Yes, Mike Scott. That's. I was gonna say Mike Evans. I was like, I think it's a football player. But yeah, if it's like Mike Scott and Horford and no picks, then yeah, I mean, I think like the Deer District might just be engulfed in flames after that.
Have you given thought to any other trade targets that you could see or you think the Bucks should pursue?
There's actually another OKC point guard who I am interested in, and I think, again, I have no idea what asking prices are going to be or if they would even want to move this player. Dennis Schroeder really impressed me in the playoffs, and he's a little bit younger. I think he's 27. I think he's expiring this next season on like 14, 15 million per. Again, I feel like OKC is kind of in a place where they're just like, we'll take all your picks and you can have these players. If he's gettable for like Bledsoe and stuff, which again, probably not, but who knows? I would like that. I think like the real desperation play, like I mentioned earlier, I think any team could probably get Eric Gordon, for basically like nothing right now from the Rockets. I don't think like they signed this really big extension and then just played really, really poorly. You could try to roll the dice and say, we're going to buy low. We think he's the player he has been in the past. That's like your desperation option. I threw out some names that really made Bucks Twitter upset. Now I feel like I'm blanking. But basically, you just look at like the list of like who's either like on a bad team that doesn't really mind being bad for a year or two, or who is like just grossly overpaid. And those are pretty much the guys. Because again, the Bucks cabinet in terms of assets is pretty bare. I mean, like Drew Holiday would be great. I wouldn't want to give up Khris Middleton to do it. I don't think he's enough of an upgrade. And I don't know if they can get him without doing that.
You also run into the issue. I don't know how many teams are going to think like this, but some of them aren't going to want to help out the Bucks if they think that Giannis is still in play.
Lowry would be awesome, but I don't think there's any way that the Raptors ever, unless it's for Giannis, I don't think the Raptors are going to trade Kyle Lowry to the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, this is something I floated before this year because I remember there was this, I feel stupid now for saying it, but there was some thought they might just tear it down. Instead, they just decided to be very good, which I think more teams should decide to do that. But I remember floating on Twitter like, oh man, if they tear it down, I wonder if the Bucks could get Lowry. And Anthony Doyle, of course, on a Kyle Lowry and Giannis related issue, slides in immediately and goes, I don't think the Raptors are going to try and help out the Bucks. And I was like, you know what? Fair point. So yeah, like Miami, Dallas, Toronto, etc. Maybe the Lakers, the Warriors. I don't think they're going to be jumping out of their seats to say, here, this will help you contend and keep Giannis forever.
I'm with you on that one. I have three names for you, and they range from super ambitious to medium ambitious to on the lower end. So I'll start from the bottom and work my way up. I don't really know what's going on in Chicago after the Billy Donovan hire. That seems like maybe like they might have more immediate ambitions than I thought. And didn't have the best year, but I'm inclined to also blame that a little bit on Bulls being the Bulls. But Thomas Satoransky feels like someone who might be able to help them when you look at the playoffs.
You know, at first I thought you were going to say, like, your low end was Zach LaVine. I was going to like, oh, my goodness, Dan, you are an eternal optimist. Yeah, Sato would be fine. It's one of those where, like, you know, I almost feel bad because I've liked Sato for a while. I think he's a good player. I think if that's the guy you get after this horrible, like, you don't make a coaching change, the player you bring in is Sato, that's tough. But I think he could be certainly a logical target, especially if they end up drafting yet another guard.
Yeah, my thought process there was like, if you that's someone maybe you could get for your salary filler that doesn't include Bledsoe and then like picks. Like if it's, I probably wouldn't give up a first for him, but if it's a second, or if you could, you know, if they really like DJ Wilson for some reason, so that you keep, the idea would be to keep Bledsoe, Middleton, and Giannis, Hill, and Lopez, and then add a Sato. The other name,
or even like if you trade everybody else, like bring him in as like a rotation guy. Okay, no, I like that. I would give up 2 seconds for Sato.
The medium guy that I had suggested, he might be on the ambitious end, just given how important he is to his team right now. But Devontae Graham, knowing that he's going to hit 2021 free agency, if Charlotte feels like they can capitalize on his value, and in that scenario, you're probably giving up a pick and prospect or 2 picks. But just what he can do off the dribble, how defenses collapse around him in Charlotte, I would be a big fan of him in Milwaukee.
I would too. I assume I just feel like Charlotte wouldn't give him up, but I guess I would have thought the same with Kemba Walker. So maybe there is a chance that would be a lot of fun. I think his game has some holes, but his pull-up 3-point shooting, if it's sustainable, but if you're the Bucks, you kind of have to roll your dice on ifs right now. It would be great with Giannis. I just remember the name that made Bucks Twitter hate me. His teammate and backcourt mate, Terry Rozier, who feels eminently available and who quietly hit 40% of his threes this year. But
he's always kind of been like a good off-ball player too. And so if you I don't know if he's I feel like he might give you less off the dribble creation than Sato, which is then an issue. But if you're just looking for pure spacing, where I don't know that, you know, if you want to give up Eric Bledsoe for him, if you're that low in his contract, sure. But if you can replace like some of the Eric Bledsoe minutes, he gives you another half-court outlet for sure. He would definitely help Milwaukee.
Yeah, I'd basically you'd have to throw him in the Wes Matthews role. He's not going to run 30 pick and rolls a game with anybody, but he can spot up a bit and cut and create off the ball. Yeah, I wouldn't hate that either. But again, I really hope the Bucks aren't touting Terry Rozier as their big addition. But Devontae Graham, that would be more intriguing.
The more ambitious one, and you mentioned Zach LaVine. Like, I don't know if it's Dante DiVincenzo and a future pick. Like, if they're willing to sell that low on, like, if they, like, maybe Chicago, just because it's a new front office regime and they're like, well, you know, we're going to be here, like, for at least 4 years or something. Like, maybe we have interest in an incredibly loosely protected pick in 2024 or with the option to defer to 2025 or something like that. And maybe you could suss out a third team again that might send something to them for Eric Bledsoe. Zach LaVine wouldn't be a bad fit in Milwaukee, but the name, plural, that I was thinking of is, can you latch on as a third team in a deal where Brooklyn's trying to get its third star? Because I actually think Brooklyn has some really attractive trade packages, but if you're going after, I don't know who the guy is, If it's if it's a Bradley Beal, you would think that the Washington wants to get younger than a LeVert and a Dinwiddie. So can Milwaukee kind of join that deal to send stuff to a Washington or whatever team Brooklyn's dealing with, where they're going to end up getting back LeVert or even Spencer Dinwiddie, because those two players help them a great deal. Another name that the Nets could go after is Oladipo. I'm sure the Pacers would probably be more okay with LeVert and or Dinwiddie in that situation. So I'm not necessarily sure what the third star would be that Brooklyn is targeting, but that might be a deal to join, because the Bucks can offer picks, Dante DiVincenzo, to the team that's giving up a higher, and like maybe it's Orlando if Brooklyn is like really high on Aaron Gordon and they're giving up Spencer Dinwiddie. Either of those two players, whether it's LeVert or Dinwiddie, would just be fantastic gets for Milwaukee. It probably would require them unloading the clip of cost-controlled assets that they have at their disposal, though.
I would unload the clip for both of those guys, which I don't know if that's feasible, but like Dinwiddie and LeVert just seems that seems all of a sudden, and I assume in this you're keeping Khris as well.
Yeah, and it was like whichever one of them you can get, because you obviously don't have enough stuff to get both. But whatever one you can get, I think is just an insta fit.
Yeah, I do as well. Like LeVert's shooting a little bit concerns me from three, but there is a lot of upside there. I think Dinwiddie is just good. I think, like, again, not probably as splashy, but a much, much better fit at the point guard position. And maybe, I mean, he's taken leaps before from, a fringe NBA player to a solid starter. Maybe in this perfect situation for him, he'd be set up to take another leap. He can, his crypto and his game will take off at the same time. We'll see. But like, definitely Dinwiddie. I think I would like Dinwiddie or LeVert. I think LeVert is probably seen as the more attractive. I'm almost more inclined to give up the clip for Dinwiddie, and definitely like Chicago, take your pick of anything besides Khris and Giannis that we have available for LaVine. I mean, that would like LaVine, Khris, and Giannis would just be incredible. But I don't know if that's possible. You never know.
That's definitely on the ambitious end of the spectrum. And I think I agree with you that Dinwiddie's probably just more scalable than LeVert. He's one of those guys that feels like he's going to hit or feel more comfortable, pulling up from three off the dribble than rather spotting up, which could be the issue there. Sort of moving on, though, here. So one of the things that's probably not being talked about enough, at least nationally, is the Bucks have a ton of free agents themselves. And so looking at Sterling Brown, restricted free agent, Pat Connaughton, Robin Lopez has a player option, which I think he would exercise. There's Kyle Korver, Wesley Matthews has a player option. Who do you see leaving? Who do you see coming back? Is there at least one of those guys that you can identify as must keep from Milwaukee? Because it does seem like, they need to try and improve the roster, but at least to some degree, they do have to take care of their own, because at least I'm looking at Wes Matthews as the guy for me that I'm like, well, he needs to come back.
No, you took the words right out of my mouth there with Wes Matthews. I think he needs to be, out of this core of players, their number one priority. I know from some talking to some folks around the league. I don't like saying league sources. I like saying folks around the league. From talking to some folks around the league, I know the Bucks are interested in keeping him. I don't know if they necessarily have the best idea of what he's going to do. They can't go over the cap to keep him without burning one of their cap exceptions. I believe they have the biannual and the mid-level. I don't know if they would use the mid-level for Wes. I guess we'll see how the rest of free agency shakes out. I don't know if he would want to take another vet min or not. Maybe another 1-and-1 that keeps some flexibility, and then kind of sign a nudge, wink deal 2 years from now, and the Bucks have his early bird rights. Basically just tell him, no matter what, if you want to come back again, we'll sign you for a little, probably more than your market as a 36-year-old swingman off of a ACL, I believe, or an Achilles, I believe. But yeah, I think he needs to be the first priority. I think you got to figure it out, whether he's your fifth starter on a more loaded starting five or your best bench wing. I just think he should be a priority. His defense, he was deserving of the 1 or 2 or whatever votes Khris Middleton got for all defense. I think I put him on my fake ballot just to give him the nod. But I think he should have gotten a vote or two. He was that good. He defended the best wing players the Bucks played.
He definitely should have gotten more fourth quarter minutes in the playoffs. Definitely earned that.
You know what's funny is that's so tied to one of their other big issues of like, you could say, Khris couldn't play more minutes in some of these games because of foul trouble. He picked up so many fouls. And I think it was like game 1 and 3 or game 1 and 4 because he was guarding Jimmy Butler the whole fourth quarter. And Jimmy Butler had his 2 best quarters of the playoffs going against Khris and not Wes Matthews, who did tremendous on him. So it would have worked out better for literally everything if Wes played those minutes. But, well. So I think, honestly, like my initial thoughts for like an offseason plan for the Bucks right after Game 5 was like get the new coach in there, which I don't know if that's happening now. and sit down with West and say, listen, we're actually going to play you in fourth quarters this time. Don't worry. So maybe he's less inclined to come back. Who knows? I don't have any insight there. But I think he's the priority. I think Sterling Brown's going to leave, and I think the Bucks are going to be fine with that. There's not like bad blood. They just never really played him consistently, and they didn't send him to Oshkosh to play with the Herd consistently. I mean, I think really like kind of a failure on the Bucks' part and maybe these guys just aren't any good. Him and DJ Wilson, the two in particular. I think they both have a chance to be like rotational wing players in different ways, but they just have never played. They just have not gotten reps. So I think he's going to go somewhere else and look for minutes. I think Pat Connaughton's going to be in the Delhi situation where, like, if there's nothing really there, he probably comes back. But if some team, for whatever reason, saw something they liked and offered him, like, $8 million a year, Giannis is going to send one of those LeBron tweets, like, the minute the offer sheet is first signed when the Bucks could still match, and just be like, have fun, Pat. Good luck. I don't even know if he's restricted. He might not be restricted. But if he gets an offer, I don't think the Bucks will go and pay him, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't think he's restricted anyway, but yeah, that's like I don't think you look at him and like, oh, we need to have him back.
I would hope not. I mean, the Bucks like playing him a lot, but I don't think he's integral to what they do and anything like that. So I think if somebody pays him, he's gone. Otherwise, sure. I mean, bring him back as the 11th guy. That's fine. Robin Lopez, I can't tell. I don't know how he feels about not really playing in the playoffs at all. Probably not great, but who knows?
Just giving him $5 million though would be my counter, even if he wants to leave.
Yeah, and it's a deep center class. I mean, I've got rankings for all the positions, and like there's a lot of centers who I think are going to end up making vet min. Like I gave them all numbers. So I had Robin Lopez as the 14th best center. Like 19th is a guy like John Henson. 26th is like Jan Mahimi, who's like not exciting, but like an NBA player. Like Bismack Biyombo is in the 20s. There's a lot of centers hitting free agency. It's like
those 2016 centers coming off those contracts.
There's a lot of them, man. Hassan Whiteside's getting out here. Tristan Thompson's getting out here. Big money guys, and they're not going to get that again. But I think he might just opt in just for that reason, although he could just be trade collateral. Did I miss anybody?
There's Kyle Korver, which he might be a retirement candidate at this point too.
Yeah. He's either going to retire or Bud's going to play him way, way too often, whatever he
or
desires.
Be starting at the 2 spot for Milwaukee.
Oh, please don't speak that into the universe.
This is kind of 2 questions rolled into one, because we all know what the Bucks could really use, and there's like, if they're going to let other free agents walk, I think like, their wing depth after Giannis and Khris Middleton has never actually been too great, which is something I don't think has been talked about enough. They should have, like, the math on them is really tight. Like, if you assume that they bring back Ersan Ilyasova, and maybe they don't, but Robin Lopez exercises player option, even if you just pencil in Wesley Matthews' player option, the number 24 pick hold, and then just cancel everybody else, like, they are, like, basically right up against the tax. Like, they have wiggle room under it, but it's like I have them at sub $2 million if we're using this year's cap projections into next year. And so that should give them the flexibility necessary to spend the entire big MLE while staying under the apron, but you still have to go into the tax. And so we know that Mark Lazary said that they'll go into the tax. 1, are you buying that? Like, do you think that actually happens? And then 2, based off what you think there, are there any free agents that you're looking at in that MLE range that you really would like to see Milwaukee go after?
I'll believe it when I see it at this point. I mean, I mentioned
definitely where I'm at with you. With him, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like we've heard all this talk, and the Bucks have been steadfast. Like when the time is right, which I mean, sometimes it's sounded more like when Giannis's extension actually kicks in, which wouldn't be for a whole nother year. But like when the time is right, we will totally do it. But then like, I think Malcolm Brogdon would have helped more in the bubble than a 2020 bad first and 2 future seconds. But we are where we are. And I think some of these players the Bucks could have acquired. I mean, we said, OKC was shopping Danilo Gallinari, and he didn't complete a deal with the Heat, or they didn't complete a deal with the Heat because he wouldn't sign an extension. So he was available if you would guarantee him more years. The Bucks are the one team in the league not looking to clear cap space for 2021 to sign Giannis. Maybe they could have gotten in there, but I'm sure it would have required taking on some extra money because Gallinari is very well paid and future money. And also, I mean, they didn't want to disrupt as much midseason, which sure, but also that. I mean, there's like all these moves. I mean, you even look at, you want to get real minuscule. I know you do. I do.
I'm here for it. Let's get granular.
So Sterling Brown hitting free agency, thus an expiring contract this year. The Bucks knew they could sign Marvin Williams as a buyout guy for, of course, a scaled minimum, which is standard. I mean, there's nothing cheap about that. This first part. So they could have just cut Sterling Brown, who never plays in Oshkosh and does not figure to be a part of the team's long-term future, and eat his cap hit of $4 million, whatever it is. Not very much money. And he's a second-round pick on the last year of his rookie deal. Instead, they cut Dragan Bender, who, and this will sound completely inconsequential, Dragan Bender is like, for the first time in his career, learning how to play center with the Wisconsin Herd as the 15th guy in the Bucks roster. Like, kind of like the very blurry, poor man's, like, you can see the outlines of a Brook Lopez kind of player. Mm-hmm. Like a big guy who can go vertical, who can definitely shoot threes. He hit them both in Oshkosh and in Milwaukee last year. And, like, everybody was excited about the way he was playing. Like, he was actually coming along and learning the center skills. He still fouled too much, but, like, he was looking promising. It was looking like the Bucks had found another young, good big man like Christian Wood. They cut Dragan Bender because his contract wasn't guaranteed. So it saved, like, $2 or $3 million to cut Dragan Bender and not Sterling Brown. Sterling Brown goes on to have one of the worst seeding game runs of any possible player because they were down a few guys and he had to play point guard, and he just couldn't do it. And then he didn't play at all in the games that mattered, and now he will leave. So, very small thing. But it's like one of those things where at every possible turn, like the thing that has saved money has just so happened to be the thing that was done. And this year now, it hasn't happened yet. But what we've seen from Chris Paul, the stumbling block, is his dollar amount, which is more of an issue for like the back end, the financials, than it is for actually the team building in some ways. I mean, it's kind of an issue for both. But the way it was reported, so I think it was intentional, the literal cost of him, which I don't think should be that much of a factor. So I'll believe it when I see it. In terms of options, I don't know. I don't know who's going to be available. I feel like it's going to be a very weird summer. I know one guy that sort of like Indie Bucks Twitter is all about is DJ Augustine, who I think is like a good point guard. I think he could be available if the Magic want to shift to more Markelle Fultz. I think like there's not a ton of good guards hitting free agency, but there's like enough where I think he could fly under the radar. Mm-hmm. Malik Beasley, I think, is probably going to be too expensive for an MLE, but if he wants to go to a really good team, that would probably give him a good amount of touches. I would love that. I think he's going to be too expensive. I think he's legit good and probably not leaving Minnesota, but that would be a lot of fun. In terms of forwards, I'm not really sure. Like, I've had Dario Saric ambitions for a while, but that position just feels so low on their list of needs. Paying Jay Crowder would be such a Bucks thing after he torched them, but I don't even think that'll happen. But if they did, I don't know if I would particularly look forward to it because, again, sort of a need, but not really. And I could just totally see him shooting like 24% from deep and 8 games next year. That just feels like a super bad Bucks move, but who knows?
I feel like he and Dragic are going to get like record 1-year deals from the Heat as they plan for 2021 free agency. But if you give guarantee Jay Crowder 4 years at the MLE and Miami's not offering him a longer term deal than 1 year, like maybe that gets him. I actually would like him for the Bucks because he does fancy himself like someone who could do stuff off the dribble, but like that's just like an adventure that maybe they don't have the bandwidth for on offense.
And the other guy you mentioned, Dragic, like I don't think he's attainable for that, which is why I didn't.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about him for the Bucks just because they have Hill and Bledsoe already, and I know Dragic would help, but I can't imagine if he's available at the MLE, of course, but now at this point I feel like he's priced himself out of that range.
Yeah, I agree as well. And then there's like a bunch of player option guys like Mike Conley, DeMar DeRozan, Tim Hardaway Jr., even Fournier. I think they all probably opt in this weird-ass year, and if they don't, I don't think they sign for the MLE. I've almost talked myself into trading for DeMar DeRozan just because I feel like the Spurs don't care.
Dark
times. We're here. I did say almost, but I don't think they're going to be able to sign anybody like that.
See, so the names that I've been thinking of, so Evan Fournier was my highest end one. I'd also kicked around Saric as well, but it's like you said, I don't know that he definitely did more from a creation perspective when he was coming off the bench with Phoenix in the bubble, but just positionally, I just feel like he's best off at the 4, and that's clearly not what the Bucks need. You could think lower end, Justin Holiday would be a great fit basically everywhere. He played a lot of backup 4 for Indiana this year, but he can play the 2 and the 3 as well. And then not someone you could look at to create, but he'll hit threes in transition and he'll hit spot up threes in the half court as well. an Alec Burks if you're looking for some like lower end guy who could create his own shot. But Evan Fournier, if you were trying to aim a little bit higher, should he opt out because he wants to play the longer term game? Like, Orlando might be a team that's willing to talk sign and trade scenarios with you, which of course hard cap you at that point. But maybe the Bucks prefer that because it gives them like a built-in excuse. But anyway, so I don't know what you would have to give up. But maybe that's something that they would consider because he would be intriguing Milwaukee because all of a sudden he's like something like their third or fourth option, which is probably the role that he's best suited for as opposed to the pseudo number one, number two that he's been in Orlando for so long.
Yeah, I'm a little worried, like, if somehow you swap Bledsoe and stuff for him, because he's been kind of a playoff pumpkin performer as well. But I do, like, if you can get him for a minimal cost, I think it's a good gamble and probably one of the best ones you'd be able to take.
Yeah, my thoughts were, like, expirings and, like, maybe the Indy first or something. Like, if Orlando's just going to lose him and Jonathan Isaac isn't playing next year, Chuma Okeke is going to be, like, his, the redshirt year that he's coming off of from his injury. Maybe they're kind of leaning towards a rebuild a little bit. I don't know. But if they're willing to do something like that where, we got to pick for him, that would be intriguing to me if I'm Milwaukee. Not a no-brainer, though, for them, but just something that if you were trying to be aggressive, it definitely has the potential to backfire, as you mentioned.
I think that'd be like the first up your sleeve deal, right? Like you take it, you say, okay, we'll think about this. You look around for like some real home run swings, but that's probably the first one you go back to if nothing else ends up materializing. I like that idea a lot.
The last thing I'll ask you, I've kept you longer than I anticipated, but what's the most undercovered thing about this team, misunderstood thing about this team? Is there something that I didn't ask that you want to talk about? We already really got on the Khris Middleton soapbox, and I'm sad to say that I was there alone, apparently.
I had him as second team All-NBA this year.
So you had 1 foot on the Khris Middleton soapbox, who should have been third team All-NBA, I thought. I know a lot of the way that players are eligible positionally, but there was still a way to finagle it where he was on instead of Russell Westbrook when you look at where players were eligible. That surprised me a little bit, but that's a different conversation.
We could do a whole podcast on just this one issue. Like, Khris Middleton literally got guard votes and forward votes and had more total votes than either of the third team guards. But I guess because he didn't have more guard votes than players who were only eligible at guard, he missed out. That seems like a very broken way to do it, and not actually helping with your rethinking of positions, league office. So work on that one. And really, I'm only fired up because, like, I don't know how many more shots. I mean, you said, like you mentioned, you've done terrific for knowing the Bucks on this podcast. There's so many guys out this year that it's like a lot easier to call someone top 10. I don't know how many All-NBA chances Khris Middleton will have. This may have been his best shot. I would have really liked for him to have gotten one of them. But regardless, one under-the-radar thing, and I think this is something I've thought about more and more and more as we went through the bubble. So, like, people, and this is something I think Sam Esfandiari first brought this up to me as a question. I've thought about it ever since. Sam's a brilliant man. What position is Giannis, right? Like, is Giannis a big or is Giannis a big wing? Like, is he a big who does wing stuff or a wing who does big stuff? And at first I kind of was like, does it really matter? Like, who cares? Skill sets are skill sets. But I do think there's something to the idea of, like, the Bucks need to probably find a way to make him play like a big more, unless he does suddenly develop this 3-level scoring. Maybe this becomes a non-issue by next season. I don't think that'll be the case. I'm a Wisconsin sports fan. We're not taught to believe in the unbelievable, at least the unbelievable good. But, like, so if he's largely the same player, takes some more threes, but largely, clearly at his best, getting to the rim, and every player is even better getting to the rim off of an action than they are by themselves. You kind of, at some point, need to have a pretty hard conversation with Giannis to get him off of the ball more, which I think optimizes him and optimizes the Bucks. No player is interested in doing that. I mean, this is the thing. Dwight Howard, for however long, like, he wanted, this is a slightly, like, tilted, things are different now, but he wanted to post up, which is like the equivalent of Giannis always handling the ball. Like, he wants to have the ball and control his own possessions. And when Dwight Howard played really good defense and ran a bunch of pick and rolls, he was like maybe the best player in the league for a hot second there, one of the best 5 players for a while there. Let me not get too spicy. I don't care that much about the Dwight Howard debate. But the point remains in that, like, you really needed him to do something a little bit different, and it was really hard to get him to do that. And I think because Giannis is generally, when he's not being called, a guy with no skills or whatever, he's generally looked at fondly across the league, especially personality-wise, I don't think he gets the same criticisms. I do think the Bucks are going to have some hard conversations about, like, you need to have the ball a little bit less on the top of the key, and you need to have it a little bit more, like, after you set a screen and roll to the rim, or after you cut, or after you, like, post up on the baseline right next to the rim while something else is happening. And I think that becomes a lot easier if you get a player like Chris Paul than it does with, like, Eric Bledsoe out there.
Right.
But that's, like, it's like a little, like, it's, like, not their number one or number two problem. It might not even be top five, but I think it's going to be, like, maybe long-term Giannis. One of the two most interesting things with the terms of his career is, like, A, will he ever become a good enough perimeter player to justify all the touches he has? And B, if not, how does he reckon with that? How does he reckon with being the two-time reigning MVP and also, like, a team maybe telling him, we can't have you having the ball this much in the playoffs? It's a very tricky thing, and I think it almost sounds like overthinking it, but also, like, watch how good Miami and Toronto were at neutralizing him largely for large parts of those series. It's like no one really talks about it. Again, the Bucks have other stuff on the table. Like, I don't know how much of that is the Bucks failing the scheme. I don't know how much of that is Giannis not really wanting to be Dwight Howard out there, you know, running a bunch of pick and rolls over and over. I don't know. It's interesting. It's something to look at. No one's really talking about it, but it might end up being hugely important for both team and player.
That's a really fascinating conversation to have, and you already sort of mentioned this, but it's an easier conversation to have if you have a better ball handler around him, if you want him to do more roll man stuff. And I didn't really go to it often enough probably, but the Heat were really able to, like, derail the Middleton Giannis pick and roll. That's probably a lot harder to do if it's a Chris Paul Giannis pick and roll. You also, I think in that scenario, you need to probably commit to more minutes of Giannis just straight out at the 5 too. Yeah. I know he logged a career high in possessions at the 5 this year, but you got to go even more than, I think he was at, like, around 500 for the season. That's just not anywhere near enough.
It's not, and, like, even just going off that, like, there's a lot of times when he's quote-unquote at the 5, and, like, Ersan Ilyasova is playing drop coverage as the nominal center on defense. Like, they need to play with him more the way the Heat use Bam Adebayo. Like, that is, like, I can't, like, I keep reading about Bam and watching Bam and how the Heat are utilizing him, and I just keep thinking, like, Giannis in that role would be truly phenomenal. It's a hard sell to Giannis to be Bam Adebayo when he's already Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Right. No, for sure, 100%. But that is something interesting to monitor moving forward. But like you said, what they do this offseason kind of informs that and then would simplify that process. And look, you can probably get, without even changing, depending on who you get this offseason, without even changing Giannis's role, you can probably drastically improve. A lot of this, though, seems like, as you already mentioned too, just based off the reporting from The Athletic, that this is still going to be a money thing. And probably, I won't say more so than ever, but if it wasn't going to be at one point following the pandemic, the gate revenue lost specifically this season, the gate revenue that's probably going to be lost next season, that might make them reticent to go after a Chris Paul, or even just go after, like, spending the entire MLE. And I don't think, we've mentioned it already a bunch of times, but I don't think you can get away with that. You arguably shouldn't have gotten away with it already, but you can't get away with it anymore.
I mean, if they do some tricks to get under the tax at this point, that's just, like, an incredibly bad look in my. And I think that's the kind of thing that, like, if there's any way that Giannis ends up getting out unexpectedly, I think it would be a situation like that. So we'll see. I'm not saying they will do that. I don't think they will do that, but we will see. It's one of those things where my official position right now is let's wait and see what happens, because I'm not just gonna take, you know, the word of. Like, you're not just going to believe someone's going to change after they've done X thing for X amount of time. I guess that's, like, deeper and maybe sadder than it really should be for a basketball podcast, but you got to see the change to believe it.
Ty, thank you for giving me basically 90 minutes of your time, way longer than I expected
sorry.
to keep. No, Bucks are going to have one of the most fascinating off seasons, and it almost kind of has nothing to do with Giannis's contract decision, in my opinion, just because he's going to be on the Bucks next year. Guys, if you do not follow Ty on Twitter, please remedy that immediately at Ty Windisch, TIWINDISCH. His content is great out there. Please listen to his podcast, as we mentioned at the top of this podcast. Ty, I'm sure I'll be pestering you again in the future, maybe the near future, if the Bucks do something seismic. So thanks again for your time, and I will definitely be talking to you soon, whether or not you want to be talking to me soon.
Trust me, man, this was a pleasure for me. I will try to not somehow answer, like, a very simple question with a 15-minute diatribe about Coach Bud or whatever else I get into talking about, but Thank you so much for having me. I would love to come back whenever. And yeah, I think no matter what happens, literally any outcome, the Bucks are going to be fascinating this summer, which you can't always say, even with the Giannis team. So yeah, this will be something.